Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the pre-show for the Sean Spicer White House press briefing. We cover all the briefings here at Right Side Broadcasting. We'll be covering this one, like those other ones, live today. So when Sean Spicer comes out, in about 42 minutes, we'll bring that to you live. I'm Steve Lookner. I'm here at Right Side Studios. Before every Sean Spicer press briefing, we do a pre-show. And we also do a post-show after. So hope you join us after the briefing. Look forward to seeing you there. If you'd like to also, another thing we do here, if you haven't seen our coverage before, on the pre-show and the post-show, we're interactive. We hear what you have to say. So I'd love to hear what you have to say today and read it on the air. If you want to write to me during the show, send in a comment or a question. You can either find me on Twitter at Lookner, at Lookner, or email me at steve.lookner@rsbn.tv. Information's on the bottom of your screen. And I'd especially like to hear your thoughts now that we've had a couple days to digest what happened on Friday, with the whole health care bill was going to be voted on, and they were going to have a conference about it, and they pulled it, and now there's no more health care bill, and now maybe they're going to move on to tax reform. What do you think about all this? It's kind of an odd place right now, because it's like no one really knows what's coming up next. And then there's this question of so let's say they do tax reform next. In theory, that could take a while to do. So is it weird that we'll have the first 100 days and no legislation has been passed? Or are you cool with that? And now that you've had a couple days to think and sleep on this whole what happened with the healthcare thing, are you blaming anyone in particular? Are you upset that no healthcare bill passed? Are you happy? Maybe you think President Trump should move on, and he should have started off with something else anyway. What do you think he should do next? I'm hearing tax reform, but at the same time, so there's not been a comprehensive tax reform passed by Congress since 1986. Quite a hard thing to do. Interesting, I was reading some stuff today and pointing out that, if you start trying to do a comprehensive tax reform, that's going to affect so many people, obviously, and you're going to have so many different groups lobbying for don't take away this deduction or help us out in this way. And so it's a very complex thing to do, and it seems like it might take a long time. So if President Trump just wants to get something done, maybe the thing to do is not start with tax reform. Now, someone else might say, well, just limit it, just limit it to corporate tax reform. Just limit it, say, to cutting the corporate tax rate. Problem with that is this. So, if you remember from the health care bill, to get any legislation through the Senate, it's going to take, it normally would take 60 votes out of the 100 because the Democrats could filibuster. Now, once a year, the party in power can use this thing called budget reconciliation, which is a procedure for getting legislation through the Senate with only a simple majority, with only 51 votes, 50 plus the vice presidential deciding vote. So, in the Senate, to get this whatever comes next, to get that through, so let's say it's tax reform, let's say it's corporate tax reform. To get a corporate tax reform bill through the Senate, the Republicans could always do it with this special budget reconciliation procedure. The problem with using that procedure is that there are rules on what you can pass, what kind of bill you can pass using that procedure. And one of the rules is, I believe, that it can't increase the deficit over the next 10 years total. I don't know if it's in 10 years from now or 10 years total, or it's on the 10th year. I'm guessing it's 10 years total. But anyways, that complicates things, because if the Republicans just try to do this, if they try to say, okay, let's just cut corporate taxes. We just want to pass that one simple thing, cutting the corporate tax rate. There's an argument that wouldn't reduce the deficit and actually would increase the deficit. And if it did, then they couldn't use it passing the special procedure. They couldn't use a special procedure, budget reconciliation, which allows them to pass it with only a simple majority. And if they can't use that procedure, they need 60 votes, and presumably they're not going to get 60 votes on that because the Democrats don't want to vote with them. So even, long story short, even if they said, it's not so simple to just say, for the Republicans to just try to pass a corporate tax cut, just that. It's not so simple. So maybe infrastructure would be the simplest thing, because if they try to pass some kind of infrastructure bill, that's something the Democrats could get on board with. You know, because it's spending that helps people in their constituencies. So we'll see what happens. But I'd like to know what you think about what should happen next, and where you think we're at right now, where you think President Trump is at right now, where you think we're at as a country. Are we in for legislative gridlock? 4 more years of this. So if you want to, again, write to me, let me know what you think. I'm at Lookner on Twitter, at LOOKNER. And you can direct message me there, or email me at steve.lookner@rsbn.tv. You know, I should actually pull up my Twitter and my email, so if you do actually write to me, I can see it. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Hold on a sec while I do that. What else did I want to discuss? I have a whole, by the way, I wrote some notes down. I want to pull those up about different things going on and what Sean Spicer might be asked about. Feel free also to write in and talk about any of the things that Sean Spicer might be asked about today. So, a bunch of different stuff. We have a new executive order supposedly coming from President Trump on energy tomorrow. So if the reports are true, President Trump's going to make an executive order which rolls back or starts the process of doing away with certain things that were passed, certain orders that President Obama made, certain directives that he made under his administration. And the basic idea of these directives that President Trump wants to roll back are they're directives that call for factoring in climate change in any kind of energy policy. So in energy policies, and regulations for power plants, these kind of things. So the very simple version of this is that President Trump believes that under President Obama, there was too much emphasis on cutting carbon emissions, emphasis on reducing climate change, to the point at which it was hurting our economy, specifically hurting energy producers like the coal industry. And President Trump, in this executive order, will be taking actions that he feels help our industry and get rid of the excessive regulations that were put on the energy industry due to worries about climate change. Now, that's not to say there will be no regulations about having to do with climate change. And one of the things I read about this is that in the executive order, it will supposedly have some commitment to wanting to, to factor in environmental concerns in energy policy. But President Trump feels it was going too much to one side under President Obama, and he wants to change that as much as he can through executive order. So we have that executive order to look forward to tomorrow. Interested in hearing what you think about that. Let me know. Let me know what you think. I already have a message here from Nancy. Nancy, thanks for writing in. Nancy says, Paul Ryan seen either before or after the downfall of AHCA. What was he doing with Obama cronies henchmen? Ditched the security detail. So it sounds to me, Nancy, like you're referring to some photo or something, or some footage of Paul Ryan, but I can't tell what it is. You say Paul Ryan seen either before or after the downfall of AHCA. What was he doing with Obama cronies henchmen? Ditched the security detail. I'd like to know more specifically about what you're referring to, so feel free, Nancy, to let me and our viewers know what you're referring to. Something I remember from Friday was I know there was a lot of anger from our viewers at Paul Ryan. We had a lot of comments, people calling in or writing in and saying they thought Paul Ryan was to blame. Do you still think that? Maybe you've thought about it this week and you thought, well, maybe I don't blame Paul Ryan so much. Maybe there's other people I blame for all of this. So would love to know. Would love to know your thoughts. Sam Miller writes in, they didn't go to vote. Wait, hold on a second. Sam, you say they didn't go to vote. They can still work on health care. Trump should work on getting rid of regulations. So one thing to point out, and this is, I think, Sam, this is a good point to point out you make, is that they didn't actually vote on the health bill. So they put it aside, but they can still revisit it. And as you say, they can still work on it. And there's nothing stopping on them from working on it while they're overtly concentrating on other things. So, and this I could see this being a good strategy, Sam, that you point out. So, people were complaining, a number of people, and saying, look, this health bill that was being proposed, it was being proposed so fast, and everything was being done so fast, but healthcare is very complex, and you need a lot of time to craft a bill and deal with certain groups and make sure everybody's satisfied. Now, it's possible that one possibility here is that now that this bill has been tabled and been pulled, maybe behind the scenes, President Trump's administration starts doing some work to craft a bill, but they're not saying they're doing it in the press all the time. And that would be a way for them to take more time on this bill and work at it without having to deal with constant pressure and people saying, where's the bill? And people complaining about it or whatever. So I could see a world in which President Trump deals with other things for the next couple months, next few months, whatever, with the regulation stuff and the tax stuff and the infrastructure stuff. But at the same time, that doesn't prevent them from, in the background, starting to work on the health care bill. They can do two things at once. They don't have to do one thing all the time. And maybe the next few months that happens, and then a few months from now, after all this other stuff has been dealt with, that's when they come out and they say, oh, there's this other thing we've been working on. And so that's a way of giving themselves more time to work on a health bill. And Sam, maybe they're doing that. So Sam, you make a good point that they haven't voted on it yet and they can still work on it. And you say Trump should work on getting rid of late regulations. So I do think, Sam, if that's your view, that you will probably be made happy by the executive order that President Trump is supposed to make tomorrow on energy. So we'll see what the actual executive order says. There's no copy of it floating around yet, but I know Bloomberg had an article last night where they were reporting what a decent amount of what they thought would be. They had some source that was telling them roughly what was going to be in this executive order, at least according to them. So you might want to look up there. Thank you, Sam, for your comment. Appreciate it. This is a message from Al Parks. Al Parks says, just saw an interview of Doug Wead with Ron Paul talking about election and new book Game of Thorns. Recommend? I'm buying it. So I don't know who Doug Wead is. Maybe I should, but I don't. I'm going to Google Doug Wead. Let me see this. Doug, W-E-A-D. I admit when I don't know things. I'll let you know. He is a conservative commentator and writer, author of several books. So in this book, Game of Thorns, it's good that you talk about. Game of Thorns, it's Doug Wead's book, The Inside Strategy of Hillary Clinton's failed campaign and Donald Trump's winning strategy. So, and you think, now Al, I can't say, you write recommend, question mark, I'm buying it. I can't tell if you're saying, do I recommend it, or are you suggesting that you recommend it? Anyways, I haven't read the book, so I can't recommend it either way. But it sounds like you like Doug Wead. So it's, I guess what I could say is if you like Doug Wead, you might want to check out his book because he wrote it. But Al, if you pick up the book and you read it, feel free to write back sometime and let us know what you think of the book. And if you want to, you can, I'll say on the air what your review of the book is. So thank you, Al. Speaking of Hillary Clinton, there's an interesting post on Gateway Pundit today, which is, I haven't watched it yet, but last night, 60 Minutes did a story on fake news. And part of what they did in the story, according to Gateway Pundit, is they interviewed Mike Cernovich, and they were implying that this, again, I'm going off of what Gateway Pundit said. I will watch the story myself, but I haven't yet. They were, according to Gateway Pundit, the 60-minute story was basically saying something like, these people on the right were putting out these fake news stories about Hillary's health being bad, and Hillary's health had no problems, and she just had pneumonia, and that's it. And what Gateway Pundit does in their article is they talk about all these things, like the footage of Hillary stumbling coming up the stairs. They talk about all these things that weren't reported on, and different footage, which I'm guessing you've seen, of Hillary having odd episodes. And they say 60 Minutes didn't report on any of these things in their story. And they also point out that, like, Mike Cernovich at one point points, and so they also point out that basically 60 Minutes just accepts the campaign, the Hillary campaign, saying, oh, well, she stumbled in front of that car at the 9/11 event and was carried into the car. That was just due to pneumonia. And at one point, Mike Cernovich, they put a clip of it up, says, well, you're just believing 60 Minutes what they tell you, right? You have no other source for that. And then 60 Minutes kind of ignores that point from Mike Cernovich. So it's a neat article that's on Gateway Pundit if you're interested in that kind of thing. I'm interested. I got to watch the story. Oh yes, and by the way, as Micah reminds me, Mike Cernovich has a show on our network Monday, Wednesday, and Friday it's currently. Is it 10 p.m. Eastern? I believe it's 10 p.m. Eastern. Michael will correct me if I'm wrong. And it's called Right Mindset. That is correct. Right Mindset with Mike Cernovich. So check that out if you like. Maybe Mike Cernovich tonight, since it's Monday and he's on, we'll talk about the 60 Minutes show where he's interviewed. 60 Minutes segment. So I will watch it later. If you want to know more about it, one thing you could do is read that article on Gateway Pundit, which I found interesting. But I can't speak to the actual segment. I got to watch the segment myself. Let's see here. We have another message from Mr. D. Ebanks. Oh, and by the way, I should say, this is the pre-coverage, the pre-show for the Sean Spicer press briefing. See, over my shoulder, if I point, no, that way, over my shoulder this way. It's going to be, so when Sean Spicer actually comes in to do the briefing, we will go full screen and show you the briefing, and then we will come back here for the post-show. We might take post-show. I don't know yet if we're taking phone calls on the post-show, but you can definitely comment on what you thought about the briefing, and maybe we'll take some phone calls too. If during the briefing you have any thoughts, like say you hear Sean Spicer say something or some you thought was interesting or some question you hear from the media you didn't like or any kind of comment, feel free to send it to me during the briefing and I can read it on the air after the briefing. If you want to write to me, direct message me at @Lookner on Twitter or email me at steve.lookner@rspn.tv. Would like to hear from you. Mr. D. Ebanks writes in, hey Steve, Redemption X here. Did you hear anything about Trey Gowdy getting a federal judge to order Vince Foster's body exhumed and a specific autopsy performed? He was shot in the back of the head twice, yet deemed self-inflicted suicide. I wonder how he got the second shot off. Also, I am hearing the body was stolen, both in the body and the ambulance, and it was found burnt to a crisp a few miles away. Any info on this? I have no info on either Trey Gowdy getting a federal judge to order Vince Foster's body exhumed, and I have no info on the details of the body being stolen in the body in the ambulance. I can't help you, Mr. D.A. Banks. I have no info there for you. So I know some people still have questions about the whole Vince Foster suicide episode, but I personally have no info I can give you, Mr. D.A. Banks. So thank you for asking. If somebody else out there has info that they'd like to share with Mr. D.A. Banks, Mr. D.E. Banks, I'll let them know how to reach you on Twitter. So it's at Redemption710NX, but it's R3D3MP710NX. That's Mr. D.E. Banks. So if you have information that he wants about the Vince Foster thing, feel free to direct message him there on Twitter. Let's check here, make sure I'm caught up. Oh, this is, Al Parks had another thing to say. Al Parks said, I just heard of Doug Weed an hour ago. He cut deep into the Clinton campaign. I'll let you know what the book is like. Thank you, Al. We look forward to hearing your review of Al Parks' new book on the 2016 election. I just need to pull up my email here for a second. Sorry, I closed it. I don't know why I closed it. Here we go. Oh, we have a message, I think, from Jason Thornton. Jason Thornton, hi Jason. Jason writes in, Steve, if members of Congress and the Senate were forced to use Obamacare like they forced us to use, it would be fixed quickly. Do you think voters should demand that they don't get special health care like they voted for themselves and are forced to use the same plan pushed on the American people? Regards, Jason Thornton. Jason, I think this is an excellent question, and I think the point even goes farther here, and let me say why. So I have in my life worked at jobs where I had like nice employer-sponsored health care. And I do know that while I did that, I really had no clue how bad like not cushy, good work health plans were and how bad health plans were and how frustrating the whole system was if you have to go on like either a health plan you buy yourself or some health plan that's not good from some employer. And I just know how insulated I was. And I'm also someone who I keep up with the news and stuff, but I do agree with you that until you yourself, you can read about this stuff, but until you yourself have to get on a plan that's not like cushy employer-provided plan, you don't get, until you yourself have to have the frustration of trying to figure out how much things are going to cost and trying to ask health providers this and not getting good information or getting incorrect information and trying to figure out whether your insurance covers stuff and then having to deal with the insurance company and it takes a million years to get an answer on stuff and it's so hard to contact them. And also, until you're in a situation where you're not making tons of money and these decisions are actually important in terms of your financial well-being, you don't really, I don't think, it doesn't really hit you how messed up the system is. And I just know that for me. And so not only I think, so I agree with you, the Congress people have all their great, I'm sure it's really good health plan. So not only are they so insulated from what ordinary people have to go through, but also many of the people who are influential in Washington and influential in our society, they have these good jobs and they work for these big corporations, or they have lots of money so they can buy crazy health plans. So anybody with lots of money or who works for some big corporation, and a lot of those people are the influential people in government and in society, they don't really appreciate how bad it is for the average person to deal with health care. And it's not just that they're not on the plan, and it's not that they don't have to personally have one of these plans. It's also, there's nothing like not having a lot of money to really make you focus on how much health care is costing you and how much it might cost to go to the doctor. And yeah, so Jason, I agree with your general point that because Congress people don't have to be on this plan, it doesn't hit them like it would, how messed up the system is and what kind of fixes need to happen. And I'm not saying they can't be sympathetic. I think they can be sympathetic. But from personal experience, to me, unless you're in that position of being on one of those plans or not having health coverage at all because you can't afford it, and also being in a financial situation where you can't afford to either buy that plan or you buy the plan that's costing you a ton of your income and you think oh, I don't want to go to the doctor now because this plan isn't covering any of it, and you're trying to figure out whether to get a procedure and you can't get a straight answer on how much it's going to cost, and it's this crazy insurance system you have to deal with. Unless you're personally in that situation, I don't think you can fully appreciate how messed up the system is and how much it needs to be fixed. So there's a difference between being able to be sympathetic and being able to fully appreciate it. And I'm just talking about personal experience because I didn't fully appreciate it. And I'm someone now who does buy my own insurance and it's just, I see every time I have to deal with it just how messed up the whole thing is. Let me say that again. I get really frustrated. One thing I get really frustrated about is supposedly consumers are supposed to, help push healthcare prices down by choosing procedures based on how much they cost and choosing among different providers. I've asked, there are places I've gone to for regular care who I like the place, and I'll ask them for a simple question how much will this thing cost? So I have this insurance. If I get this, how much will it cost? And I cannot get a straight answer. And I don't think they're being mean to me. I think they're a good place. But it's I can't get a straight answer on that from just one provider. And whenever I've had questions about insurance stuff from my big insurance provider, I won't give their name, but I've had this with different providers, it's you try dealing with their customer service and getting a quick answer on these kind of questions. It's when it comes to questions about how much stuff will cost, it's so hard to get straight answers and get them in a timely manner. So it's just frustrating. I could go on and on. But anyways, so Jason, but I think more than just, well, let me get back to your point. You think should voters demand that they don't get special health care? Well, I don't know, I guess I would feel uncomfortable with saying you can't get this health care that your job offers you. As someone who like I would feel uncomfortable with the government saying, hey Congress people, you can't get this health care. It feels a little like government meddly to me. So I get why you're saying that, but at the same time, I think hopefully, maybe it is a problem. So either way, but maybe how about this? Like they should have to, not they should have to. Something they should be encouraged to do is follow around. Congress people should have to. Here's a proposal: every congressperson has to go to one of their constituents who doesn't have fancy work health care and has to get some plan they bought themselves and doesn't make much money, and has to sit on the phone with them every time they call customer service, and has to surf the web with them every time they try to get answers, and has to sit with them in their kitchen table as they decide whether they can afford health care. I think if people did that more, they'd have a better idea of what's going on. So I would just encourage the Congress people to get more involved, but they have more of a personal connection to people. But in terms of mandating this, I get a little icky on mandating those kind of things. But I see where you're coming from, Jason. But I also think that the issue is not just Congress people not having regular people health care. It's most of the influential people in government and in business and in society not having the health care that normal people have to have, if they have health care at all, or not even being faced with the options those people have. So it's a very good question, Jason. I thank you for writing in. So I was just going to say, and Micah, you said it in my ear just as I was going to say it, just to remind you, we have 15 minutes until the Sean Spicer press briefing. Sorry, I just need a little drink of water here. 15 minutes, Sean Spicer will come out, do his press briefing from the White House. We cover them all here live at Right Side Broadcasting. We're happy to bring it to you. And afterwards, stay with us for the post show. Stay with us. I should mention also, hold on. If you want to write in, the information's on the screen. Write to me during the pre-show and post-show. Let me know your thoughts on the Sean Spicer briefing, on the health care bill, on what's going on with the Trump administration, on what you think they should do next. Would love to hear from it. Love to hear from you. Also, if you like our coverage of the press briefings and also of events like the rallies, to President Trump rallies. I hope he has another one again soon. We'll see if he does, now that the health care bill is, now that he's moving on to something else. Maybe he'll move on to tax reform and have rallies where he talks about tax reform. But if you like when we cover the rallies, and you like when we cover CPAC and live events, and you like the coverage of breaking news here, and you like our whole alternative to the mainstream media we give you, I hope you consider helping us out with a donation, because we do rely on your donations to survive. And I'm not kidding about that. We really do rely on your donations to survive. And it's very easy to donate, even a small amount. Like, don't think like, well, I donate like $1 or $2 or something, because that's all I have to donate extra, but they won't care. No, we will care, actually. Honestly, if everybody who watched like one of our rallies donated $1, we would be like set for a year or something like that. Don't hold me to that exactly, but it's just like, that really every donation really does help us, and they really do add up. So even if it's a small donation, we really appreciate it. And so if you want to donate, it's very easy. There's a chat room next to the broadcast. Just go to the bottom of the chat room, click on the $sign at the bottom of the chat room. This little $sign there. Click on it. Makes it very easy to donate to us. Also, you could donate at rsbn.tv/donate. That's rsbn.tv/donate. But honestly, like, if you've watched us before and you thought, like, I don't have a lot of money, I wish I did, which I understand, believe me, but I have like $1 I could donate. We would actually appreciate that $1. We really would. Or any amount. We appreciate any amount you can give. So thank you, obviously, to everybody who's donated in the past. You've kept us on the air. We really appreciate it. Every single donation we get makes us feel good and makes us more committed to doing this programming for you. Also, thank you to the moderators today for, as you do, always a great job moderating the chat. So let me get back to your comments. This is from Andrew Sova. Andrew Sova writes in, you gave me a link, I think, to Milo on Facebook. Let me see. And you say, Andrew, watch this. Is this the smoking gun Fox News may have? Milo posted this 39 minutes ago, and it says, is this the smoking gun of Spygate? All right, I'm not going to watch it right now just because if I watch it on the air, then you have to sit here watching me watch it on the air, which is going to be very boring for you. But Andrew, I will check it out later. But if you're interested in knowing what Andrew just messaged me about, it's Milo Yiannopoulos on Facebook 39 minutes ago posted this video, and you can go watch it yourself and see. So thanks for the tip, Andrew. Appreciate it. Sean C. writes, what do you think will happen with the American Health Care Act? Do you think they will make a revised version like with Trump's travel ban? So you make the point that with the travel ban, that first one, there was a temporary restraining order put on it. So President Trump made a second one, although there's been a restraining order put on that, at least for now. But do you think so the situation's a little different in the sense of, obviously, the second travel ban was designed to not be something that the courts would accept as constitutional. But with this, if there's a revised health care proposal, it's not, the worry is to get Congress, to have it be a bill that Congress would actually pass. I have to imagine, Sean, at some point, the president will try to do something with health care. I cannot imagine a world in which 4 years go by and President Trump does nothing ever on Obamacare. Now, he has said he thinks Obamacare will implode and then the Democrats will be willing to deal with him more on Obamacare. So perhaps President Trump will give it some waiting time. Now, there's one school of thought that he'll want to do something before the midterm elections. I don't know, but I do think something will happen, even if it's something more small scale than this health. Like this health bill, the AHCA, was really like a big bill in terms of, covering a lot of things. And I could see maybe does President Trump try to do something a little less ambitious, make some tweaks to Obamacare or something, and he might say, hey, Congress won't let me really change the whole thing, but I at least want to make some of it a little better for Americans. So I don't know, but I do think there will be something. The question is when. So Sean, it's a good question. Thanks for writing in. Can I also say something else? Here's something that bothered me this morning, and maybe I'm just wrong about this. If you've watched me before, you know I like watching Morning Joe or listening to Morning Joe. I do think I know it's on MSNBC, but I do think it's balanced in the sense of you don't know what you're going to get. They try to have a mix of people who support Republicans, people who support Democrats. Joe Scarborough himself is a mix. Sometimes he's pro-Trump, sometimes he's anti what Trump is doing. But I do think it's not like I turn it on every day and I know exactly what they're going to say. So I do appreciate that part about it. But I was watching it this morning, and Joe Scarborough was taking this view, which was like, roughly speaking, President Trump in future legislation has to work with the Democrats. And if he works with the Democrats, for example, on like tax reform, he'll get a bunch of Democratic votes. And I really question that whole premise. I think there's a decent chance that the Democrats now, their attitude toward working with President Trump is the same as the Republicans' attitude was toward working with President Obama. In the sense of, I don't see right now Democrats jumping across party lines to vote on something that President Trump proposes. Even if it's like an infrastructure thing, I think it would be hard to get Democratic votes. I think a lot of Democrats just want to vote against whatever President Trump wants. And so I'll believe it when I see it, where President Trump gets, say, 40 House votes to come along with him on a proposal for tax reform, 40 House Democratic votes. And so Joe Scarborough kept saying this on Morning Joe this morning about how there was a world in which President Trump could just work with the Democrats and he'd get all these Democratic votes to come over, and then he wouldn't have to worry about like the really conservative Republicans. And I have my doubts about that. I think a lot of the Democrats right now are just committed to being anti-Trump. And I think, it's not even a question of policy at this point. I think a lot of Democrats personally don't like President Trump, or even if they don't, a number of their constituents, they might think a number of my constituents, especially the really, the ones who will definitely vote, they don't like him. So, they're not going to vote with anything he says. So I hope President Trump can pass lots of legislation that helps America. I would love to see the houses work together, the parties work together. I think that's a giant problem with Congress, and it's been for years, is that the parties just vote along party lines and they don't just commit to get something done, and they're not willing to work together. And that's not an original thought. A lot of people have said that. So I would love to see it happen. I just think at this point, if you think President Trump has lots of lots of Democratic votes out there for his bills, just waiting for him to reach across the line, I don't know about that. I have my doubts, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay, we have about 7 minutes until this press briefing starts. And Sean Spicer's White House press briefing. As soon as it starts, we'll bring it to you live. Until then, this is the pre-show, and I'm taking your comments and questions, and giving some of my own thoughts too. So the information is below if you want to send in a comment right there at the bottom of your screen. I have a couple more comments to get to. David Obst says, why not have a vote on AHCA? They would lose anyway. At least they would know who voted against it. So, David, this is a good question, and I'm guessing that this was a big discussion in the White House, at the end of last week. And I'm guessing there was some support for having a vote. I mean, President Trump even said this. We heard on Thursday and Friday from both from Sean Spicer that President Trump wanted to have a vote and wanted people to go on the record. And so when you say why not do it, there's different reasons we might give for them. Now, I'm guessing they had a reason why not do it. So one would be, as one of our viewers said before, so they could go back to it later. Maybe not voting on it and not having it fail makes it easier in a few months to go back to it. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that the bill was going to lose by a lot of votes, not just by a few votes. It's one thing if the bill loses by a few votes in the House because, like, the House Freedom Caucus votes against it. But it's another thing if the vote moved, and it looked like this might happen because you were getting both conservatives and moderate Republicans publicly saying on Friday they weren't going to vote for the bill. Like on Twitter, they were posting it. And it seemed like there might be, as it would be called, what do people call it? Like a jailbreak, where people all just, like a bunch of votes at the last minute start going against the bill. And it would be pretty embarrassing for the White House if, like, the bill didn't pass by, like, a lot of votes. So, perhaps they had the sense that that was going to happen and they wanted to avoid that. So, they could have still, it's still possible, David. Maybe the White House part of them wanted to have the vote because they wanted to get people on the record, but maybe they just felt that was outweighed by other considerations. So, a good question, David. This is from, about 5 minutes till the press briefing. It's supposed to start. Maybe it'll start a little late. Sometimes it does. We'll go live to it whenever it starts. And Micah we lost the feed for a second over my soldier, but it's shoulder, not soldier, but it's back. The Postulate writes in, why make healthcare complicated? Pass law that forces insurers to insure existing illnesses and insure children up to 22 or 26 if still at education institution and dependent on parents. For Medicaid, just have a means test and patients pay pro rata and state pays difference. So you have some proposals here. Forces insurers to insure existing illnesses and insure. So I guess so the postulate, I'm assuming there's more to your plan than you're saying, because you say forces insurers to insure existing illnesses and insure children up to 22 or 26 if still at education institution. So what about for people who don't have an illness now but might get it later and they're not children? What you wrote me here doesn't say anything about that, and I'm not saying you don't have an idea about it. I'm just not sure what your plan says about that. So if you'd like to write back and clarify a little more, that would be fine with me. I'm just trying to get your complete proposal out there. And I do understand the sentiment that you say, the postulate, why make healthcare complicated? Healthcare is very complicated in this country, and so I was reading last week that 25% of healthcare costs in this country are spent on administrative costs, and that's much more than any other country. I think the next higher country is like 11 or 12%. And one proposal, now some people don't like this plan, but one benefit that people who propose like a single payer plan. So some people hate this idea, but if you have say you have a single payer plan, and this is like in Canada, they have government-run healthcare, and I understand why people wouldn't like government-run stuff. But at the same time, one thing about having a single insurance provider is it totally cuts down on all those gigantic administrative costs, all the different people in billing departments, both in doctor's office and in the insurance industry. And our system is so complex the way it is. And there's the Medicaid and the Medicare and the Veterans Administration and the different types of insurance. And it's so complex. And it's think about that. 25% of healthcare costs in this country go to administrative costs. A quarter go to administrative costs. That's a lot. So definitely. Oh, I'm sorry, Micah? Could you say that again, Micah? I missed you. Oh, sorry. I just want to give a shout out. Kay donated $10 online on the chat room. So thank you, Kay, so much. That's really nice of you. We like to give shout outs here to people who donate because, it keeps us on the air. And Bill donated $11. Thank you so much, Bill. That's really sweet of you guys. As I was saying, I'm sorry, Will? I got to get the name right here. Jill! Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was talking and listening. Jill donated $11. Thank you so much. As I was saying before, your donations, they really do keep us on the air. And even if it's a small donation, every little bit helps. And if everybody just donated a little bit, that would really keep us on the air for a long time. Because we do get a lot of viewers. But I understand, and if you don't have extra money to donate, I get it. Just you watching and liking our videos and telling your friends about us, that's a big help too. But if you enjoy our program and you have a little to donate, we really appreciate it. And thank you, Jill. And who was the first one again, Micah? Okay, really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. If you want to donate as well, just click on the chat room. In the chat room next to the video, there's a dollar sign underneath the chat room. You can click on it. And as I said before, even if you only want to donate $1, seriously, it helps us out. No donation is too small. They all really help and they add up. So thank you, guys. Much appreciated. So to finish my thought, the postulate on your question, I do think simplification of health insurance is important, simplification of the health system because our administrative costs are so high. And that's one of the things that, we hear these different proposals about what to do about health insurance, and I'll sometimes tweet about this. I'll say, whether it's Obamacare or the Trump proposal, at a certain point, all these proposals are doing is shifting around who pays. But the real issue I think we need to get at is healthcare in this country just costs more than in other countries without giving extra benefits. And one example of how it costs more is we spend way more on administrative costs than other countries do. And real healthcare reform is not just changing what segment of the population pays. It's taking that giant pie of all the costs and trying to shrink it. And that, to me, is what real healthcare reform is going to involve. And we're only going to really solve the problems of healthcare when we figure out how to make healthcare cost less overall, not just switch around what segment of society is paying for, who is paying for it. So, but that's a whole other show we could do at some point. Maybe we will. But thank you, the postulate, for writing in. And it is 1:31 now. And so this press briefing was supposed to start at 1:30, Sean Spicer's press briefing. Sometimes they start a little late, as like today, but we will come on with it as soon as it starts. And just know that after the press briefing, we'll be back with the post show, taking more of your comments and questions. As usual, excellent comments today and questions. I'm always impressed with the comments and questions we get here. And we're still waiting for the press briefing, and we will go to it right when it happens. Right at this window. You don't have to go anywhere else. It'll go full screen. You won't have to watch it in the corner. It'll go full screen, and you can watch it full screen. We have a question from Don John T. Don John T. writes, when can Paul Ryan be replaced with Trey Gowdy? So it sounds like Don John T. that you do not like Paul Ryan as your Speaker of the House, and you want him replaced. And hold on, I'm just checking one thing here. Basically, Paul Ryan could be replaced when the House Republicans want him replaced, if they do want him replaced. It's up to the House Republicans to choose the Speaker. And there's been I've heard different speculation about this, about whether Paul Ryan's job might be in trouble because of what happened with the health care bill. I've heard speculation that Reince Priebus's job might be in trouble because of what happened with the health care bill. And I know a lot of people who watch our programming are upset with Paul Ryan and would like to see him replaced. So don't know if that'll happen. We'll see. Would it be interesting if, at least I'm not hearing right now that Paul Ryan might be replaced yet. Now, maybe, here's a possibility. let's say the Trump administration chooses a next big thing to go after, like they say we want tax reform. And let's say, they come out this week and they say we're going to go after tax reform next. They've already hinted at that. And let's say they write up a tax reform bill, they help the Congress write up a tax reform bill, and then that doesn't pass. If that doesn't work out, if tax reform doesn't work out, at that point, does the Speaker of the House change? At that point, does Reince Priebus lose his job? You know, I would think that if the Trump administration says, okay, they pick one thing to focus on next. If nothing gets done with that, then it seems we've got a problem that's going to maybe require personnel changes. So don't know what'll happen. But thank you for writing in. Appreciate you sharing your view, Don John T. Let's see here. The postulate wrote back. The postulate said, let insurers make the plans. If law says you cannot be excluded and cannot be made to have a medical, maybe insurers having to compete national with a 350 million pool can bring prices down as well as premiums. So it's we are now going to the press briefing. Sorry, I can't answer your question, the postulate right now. But enjoy the press briefing. Come back after for the post show. We'll see you in a little bit.
You need to write urgent.
Margaret, everybody can tell when you get on TV.
All right, stop it. I know, nobody thinks I can tell. Wash my face, I want to come for my hair. These are
Hi guys. Good afternoon. I hope everyone had a great weekend. Seriously. It's Monday, so I brought a special guest. First, I'd like to have the Attorney General come up to the podium to make an announcement regarding immigration enforcement with respect to sanctuary cities. When the Attorney General is done speaking, we'll have time for a couple questions, and then I'll continue with the briefing. So if your question is not germane to sanctuary cities, keep your hand down, and we'll get to it after we go through the events of the day. So with that, Attorney General Sessions, come on up.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. The Department of Justice has a duty to enforce our nation's laws, including our immigration laws. Those laws require us to promptly remove aliens when they are convicted or detained of certain crimes. The vast majority of American people support this common sense requirement. According to one recent poll, 80% of Americans believe that cities that arrest illegal immigrants for crimes should be required to turn them over to immigration authorities. Unfortunately, some states and cities have adopted policies designed to frustrate this enforcement of immigration laws. This includes refusing to detain known felons under federal detainer request or otherwise failing to comply with these laws. For example, the Department of Homeland Security recently issued a report showing that in a single week, there were more than 200 instances of jurisdictions refusing to honor ICE detainer requests with respect to individuals charged or convicted of a serious crime. The charges and convictions against these aliens include drug trafficking, hit and run, rape, sex offenses against a child, and even murder. Such policies cannot continue. They make our nation less safe, by putting dangerous criminals back on the streets. We all remember the tragic case of Kate Steinle, the 32-year-old woman who was shot and killed 2 years ago in San Francisco as she walked along a pier with her father. The shooter, Francisco Sanchez, was an illegal immigrant who had already been deported 5 times and had 7 felony convictions. Just 11 weeks before the shooting, San Francisco had released Sanchez from its custody, even though Immigrations and Customs Enforcement officers had filed a detainer requesting that he be held in custody until immigration authorities could pick him up for removal. Even worse, Sanchez admitted the only reason he came to San Francisco was because it was a sanctuary city. A similar story unfolded just last week whenever Valles, an illegal immigrant and a Mexican national, was charged with murder and robbery of a man at a light rail station. Valles was released from a Denver jail in late December, despite the fact that ICE had lodged a detainer for his removal. The American people are not happy with these results. They know that when cities and states refuse to help enforce immigration laws, our nation is less safe. Failure to deport aliens who are convicted of criminal offenses puts whole communities at risk, especially immigrant communities in the very sanctuary jurisdictions that seek to protect the perpetrators. DUIs, assaults, burglaries, drug crimes, gang rapes, crimes against children, and murderers. Countless Americans would be alive today, and countless loved ones would not be grieving today if these policies of sanctuary cities were ended. Not only do these policies endanger lives of every American, just last May, the Department of Justice Inspector General found that these policies also violate federal law. The President has rightly said disregard for law must end. In his executive order, he stated that it is the policy of the executive branch to ensure that states and cities comply with all federal laws, including all immigration laws. Today, I'm urging states and local jurisdictions to comply with these federal laws, including 8 U.S.C. Section 1373. Moreover, the Department of Justice will require that jurisdictions seeking or applying for Department of Justice grants to certify compliance with 1373 as a condition of receiving those awards. This policy is entirely consistent with the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs guidance that was issued just last summer under the previous administration. This guidance requires state and local jurisdictions to comply and certify compliance with Section 1373 in order to be eligible for OJP grants. It also made clear that failure to remedy violations could result in withholding grants, termination of grants, and disbarment or ineligibility for future grants. The Department of Justice will also take all lawful steps to claw back any funds awarded to a jurisdiction that willfully violates 1373. In the current fiscal year, Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs and Community-Oriented Policing Services anticipates awarding more than $4.1 billion in grants. I strongly urge our nation's states and cities and counties to consider carefully the harm they are doing to their citizens by refusing to enforce our immigration laws and to rethink these policies. Such policies make their cities and states less safe. Public safety as well as national security are at stake and put them at risk of losing federal dollars. The American people want and deserve a lawful system of immigration that keeps us safe and one that serves the national interest. This expectation is reasonable, just, and our government has the duty to meet it, and we will meet it. Thank you.
In Montgomery County, Texas, in Montgomery County, right up the road, there was a rape in Maryland, at Rockville High School. Has anyone from the Department of Justice had any conversation with anyone in Montgomery County or Rockville, as they describe themselves as sanctuary county and city, and there's also a boatload of federal government in Montgomery County?
Well, you know, Maryland is talking about a state law to make the state a sanctuary state. The governor is opposed to that, I'm glad to hear. That would be such a mistake. I would plead with the people of Maryland to understand that this makes the state of Maryland more at risk for violence and crime, that it's not good policy. And as a former prosecutor for many years in state and federal law on the jurisdictions, I just know the historic relationship different federal agencies have with regard to honoring detainers. It's just a fundamental principle of law enforcement that if you have a person arrested and another jurisdiction has a charge, then they file a detainer, and when you finish with the prisoner, you turn them over to the next jurisdiction for their adjudication. That is what should be done with
Right.
So,
Let me answer the question.
Mr. Attorney General,
Major.
Mr. Attorney, so listening to you carefully, it sounds like you're applying the standards and the policy that the Obama administration put forward on compliance with underlying Justice Department rules. Are you taking any additional steps? And have you asked the President to maybe talk about other federal funds that are not necessarily under your control as a way to punish sanctuary cities or states?
Well, that's a good question. What I'm saying today is that essentially the policies of the Obama administration that were issued last July make clear that you should not be receiving certain federal funds if you're not in compliance with 1373. We believe that grants in the future could be issued that have additional requirements, as every grant that's being issued in America today usually has a requirement that if you qualify for this grant, you have to meet certain requirements. So we'll be looking at that in the future, and we'll continue to pursue it. But fundamentally, we intend to use all the lawful authority we have to make sure that our state and local officials who are so important to law enforcement are in sync with the federal government.
Mr. Attorney General, some of those officials of cities, for example, bigger cities, have said despite the lack of federal funding, they will continue to be sanctuary cities, that they don't care that they're losing money, essentially. What recourse does the Department of Justice have in those cities that look at what you're doing and say, we don't care, we're going to continue to implement this policy?
Well, that's very, disheartening, but I hope that the American people and their constituents in their own cities will communicate with them. And as we continue a dialogue and a discussion, and as we continue to ensure that monies that go for law enforcement only go to cities who are participating in an effective collegial cooperative way with the federal government, that would also send a message. We have simply got to end this policy. Thank you all.
What about the Eric Garner case and the white supremacist that killed the black man in New York? Is that a hate crime, sir?
Okay, you guys ready to continue? Good. Before I get into the day schedule, I wanted to read, I know there's been some interest in the State Department's statement regarding the arrests of hundreds of protesters, peaceful protesters that occurred in Russia. The statement that the State Department put out says, quote, "The United States strongly condemns the detention of hundreds of peaceful protesters throughout Russia on Sunday. The detention of peaceful protesters, human rights observers, and journalists is an affront to essential democratic values. We are troubled to hear of the arrest of the opposition leader upon arrival at the demonstration, as well as the police raids on the anti-corruption organization he heads. The United States will monitor the situation, and we call on the government of Russia to immediately release all peaceful protesters. The Russian people, like people everywhere, deserve a government that supports an open marketplace of ideas, transparent and accountable governance, equal treatment under the law, and the ability to exercise their rights without fear of retribution." Now, with respect to events for the day, this morning after receiving his daily intelligence briefing, the President participated in a roundtable with women's small business owners. The President is hosting a group of women's business owners as part of the White House's full calendar of Women's History Month events. At the roundtable this morning, Vice President Pence, SBA Administrator McMahon joined with other senior administration officials to hear from these amazing female entrepreneurs and small business leaders about their firsthand experiences, successes, and challenges. As the president said, quote, empowering and promoting women in business is an absolute priority in the Trump administration because I know how crucial women are as job creators, role models, and leaders all throughout our communities. The women in attendance this morning have incredible stories, including many who have started businesses from scratch with very limited resources and through hard work and determination turn their dreams into reality. Between them, they provide hundreds of jobs to Americans across the country. The president is dedicated to continuing to remove the unique barriers that women face in our economy, including access to capital, markets, and networks. This administration will continue to advocate for policies that support working family, including a national initiative to promote women business leaders and entrepreneurs that his daughter Ivanka is helping to lead. In honor of Women's History Month, the White House has been hosting events all throughout March. Just to name a few, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Systems Administrator Verma held a roundtable with women in healthcare, which the president attended. The First Lady held a women's empowerment lunch on International Women's Day. Earlier this month, Second Lady Karen Pence joined women from all 5 military branches for lunch at Fort Meade, and last week hosted military women at the Vice President's residence to thank them for their service. Under President Trump, the American economy is a place for everyone, regardless of their gender, to thrive. Following the roundtable, the president had lunch with the Vice President and Secretary of State Tillerson, and at 3 o'clock, the president will sign House Joint Resolutions 37, 44, 57, and 58. All of which use the powers of the Congressional Review Act to roll back job-killing rules. Before this administration, only one time in the nation's history had a president ever signed a bill that used the Congressional Review Act to cancel a federal regulation. In just his first 66 days as president, he will have signed 6 resolutions to eliminate unnecessary and burdensome rules. House Joint Resolution 37 rolls back the so-called blacklisting rule, which manufacturers identified during their meeting with the president as one of the most significant threats to growing American businesses and to hiring more American workers. The rule simply made it too easy for trial lawyers to go after American companies and American workers who contract with the federal government. The president saw that workers, taxpayers, and businesses were the ones who truly suffered under this rule, and he's glad to be signing legislation to eliminate it. House Joint Resolution 45, 57, and 58 cancel federal power grabs that took decision-making away from the states and local governments who know the unique challenges of their own populations. The president firmly believes that Washington's not always the solution to these problems, and that these bills return the power to the people by putting more decision-making in the hands of states. House Joint Resolution 44 removes a Bureau of Land Management rule known as Planning 2.0 that would have centralized federal and land management in Washington, diluting the concerns of local citizens who have a right that is protected by law to be involved in this decision-making process. HJ Res 57 and 58 eliminate the Department of Education regulations, which limits states' flexibility in how they assess the performance of schools and teacher preparation and programs. Removing these additional layers of bureaucracy will make it easier for parents, teachers, and communities and state leaders to address the needs of their students. The president will continue to work with Congress and the rest of the federal government until every unnecessary regulation that stands in the way of success for American business and American people is taken off the books. Additionally, the president spoke with German Chancellor Merkel and Indian Prime Minister Modi earlier today to congratulate them on their party's success in recent elections. We'll have readouts on those calls a little later for you both. The president also will announce the establishment of the Office of American Innovation. The Office of American Innovation will apply the president's ahead of schedule and under budget mentality to a wide number of government operations and service, enhancing the quality of life for all Americans. The office will have a particular focus on technology and data, hearing back from leaders in the industry. As some of its first priorities, the office will focus on modernizing the technology of every federal department, identifying transformational infrastructure projects, and reimagining the VA system so they can better serve our nation's heroes. The effort will be led by Assistant to the President and Senior Advisor Jared Kushner. Tomorrow, the President will sign an executive order to strengthen the nation's energy security by reducing unnecessary regulatory obstacles that restrict the responsible use of domestic energy resources. This order will help keep energy and electricity affordable, reliable, and clean in order to boost economic growth and job creation. And finally, before I came out today, Senate Democrats continued their obstruction to the president's nomination of Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, with the Judiciary Committee seeking a one-week postponement on his decision. Over the weekend, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer defended his decision to mount a filibuster against the president's unquestionably qualified nominee. If Senator Schumer gets his way, this would be the first successful filibuster against a Supreme Court nominee in American history. He argued, quote, quite misleadingly, that the Senate has, quote, required a 60-vote threshold of, quote, every Supreme Court nominee. That's simply not true. And as I've said before, only 3 support justices have faced a filibuster in the last half of the century. Senator Schumer cited 4 justices confirmed under President Bush and Obama, but in fact, among those 4, only 1 faced an attempted filibuster. That was Justice Samuel Alito. And it was President Obama who then, as a senator, voted to filibuster Justice Alito and later publicly expressed his regret for that. The fact is, an attempted filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee is rare, and to do so in this context with such an eminently qualified and brilliant judge is nothing short of obstructionism. That's why Senator Pat Leahy, the former Democratic chairman of the Senate Judiciary, said he is, quote, not inclined to filibuster, end quote, even if he ultimately may not vote to confirm the judge. The fact that the former chairman of the Judiciary Committee won't stand by the minority leader exposes the leader's efforts as nothing but obstructionism that undermines decades of Senate tradition. Through 4 days of extensive hearings, Judge Gorsuch demonstrated his judicial philosophy, his sterling academic credentials, and a brilliant legal mind. He deserves a fair up or down vote. And with that, I'd be glad to take a few of your questions. Jonathan.
Is the president serious about working with Democrats going forward after what happened with healthcare?
Absolutely. In fact, starting Friday afternoon through late yesterday, he's received a number of calls, as well as other members of the senior staff that had been working on healthcare, from members of both sides, saying that they would like to work together, offer up ideas, and had suggestions about how to come to resolution on this and get to a House vote on this.
But wouldn't this require a...
Sorry, this isn't a free-for-all. Jonathan's asking a question.
But wouldn't this require a serious course correction for the White House? I mean, the president's branded Chuck Schumer a clown, worked entirely with Republicans on this bill. Would this require a serious change of course for the president?
To some degree, sure. And I think the president talked about that. I think we learned a lot through this process. I think we're obviously looking at ways that we can improve not only how we handle healthcare, but other things, how we do everything. And I've mentioned it to some of you in the course of things. I think, one of the traits of a successful organization is to always examine how you do things. But I think that there's been a lot of outreach from members of both sides with ideas, and the president's willing to listen to these individuals. And if they can come to resolution on a way forward, obviously we're willing to listen and to move forward. But there are a lot of folks that came forward with these ideas. And with all due respect to the beginning of your question, I don't think it's a one-way street, some of the comments that have been made. I think some of the Democrats who now say they weren't involved early on in the process said that they wanted nothing to do with this process. There was no way that they would engage in any discussion to repeal. So I think it's a two-way street, and I think that we have been willing to listen to folks and their ideas. And the president's advice is that if we can come up with resolution on a way to move forward, we'll certainly entertain that.
Where's the buck stop for this failure?
Well, it's not, but just so we're clear, look, we're at the beginning of a process. I don't think we've seen the end of healthcare. As most people have noted, I think the Obama administration, from beginning to end, it ultimately took about 17 months, went through a series of fits and starts, and it wasn't until Scott Brown was elected, denying them the 60th vote in the Senate, that they finally jammed something through. And frankly, a lot of the reason that the Secretary of Health and Human Services has some of the powers that they do is because they got it, they had to jam it through. But there were several failures when Obamacare went through during the process, and ultimately they tried to go through a single payer process, and they got rebuffed on that by some of their own members. Look, we're not saying it's the end of healthcare, but I think that we are looking to look for a way forward, and I think that a lot of the members, and again, on both sides of the aisle, have reached out not just to the president, but to members of the team, willing to share some ideas, and both that will make they think that would make the bill stronger. But ultimately, the goal is to get to 216 and potentially 218, depending on where we are with special elections. And so we're going to look to see where we can get those 218 votes. And there may be other opportunities to work with people across the aisle that get us to 218. But that's the name of the game, and we're going to continue to pursue that. Jim.
Sean, the last Congress to pass significant tax reform took about 5 years, and that was 30 years ago in 1986, after the failure or the defeat of the American Health Care Act on an issue where there was broad GOP consensus. What makes the president think he can pass significant tax reform this year?
Well, I think it's been 30 years. I think we have an economy that's evolved, especially in the technology area, that has made a lot of things change. And I think our tax code is outdated. And frankly, on the business side, we're uncompetitive. There's a reason that companies are leaving America to go to other places, because same reason sometimes companies move from state to state. Our corporate and regulatory system has become unattractive for a lot of companies that want to either manufacture here, grow here, or begin here, and or want to return jobs here. I think the president recognized that. Business leaders from around the country. It's not a partisan issue. I mean, you go out to the tech sector out in Silicon Valley in particular, there's a lot of these companies out there that admittedly weren't with the president during the election or continue not to be. And I think recognize that we are not as competitive as we can be when you consider the tax and regulatory climate of other countries around the world, and we need to be more competitive. Then I think you look at the individual side of the house, and I think especially when you talk to middle-income Americans, especially when in the context of health premiums going skyrocketing up, they recognize that they need some relief. And so we've got to do what we can to address that. John Christopher.
Thank you. Historically, since healthcare has beguiled many presidents, all the way back to Harry Truman, and certainly when Hillary Clinton came to Washington, she went to the Hill and thought that she could get it done. I'm sure there are many lessons you can learn from previous presidents and perhaps previous first ladies. Has the president thought of ever reaching out to Hillary and finding out, how she maneuvered and some of the best practices or some of the pitfalls that she's come into?
Well, and I think that he's met with Dr. Zeke Emanuel and others. It's not been he has reached out to several people throughout this process to gauge both their policy ideas and strategy ideas. And I think, the president noted on Friday afternoon that we learned a lot on several fronts about strategically how to handle this, as well as some of the members that we thought we would have with us. And we're re-examining that on a variety of bases. Margaret.
We got some guidance from the White House earlier about Chairman Nunes' meeting on the White House grounds involving, I guess, the SCIF and the idea that questions about the meeting should be referred to the committee chairman. But I wanted to ask you a slightly different question, which is, does the White House know now what actually happened? Do you have issues with the idea that someone, perhaps in the executive branch, shared information on the White House grounds without you knowing about it? Are you investigating this? Do you believe it was a leak? Or was it in fact someone on the White House staff or NSC staff or on loan to either who provided the information and therefore it's not a leak?
So obviously all of what I know has been available through public comments. I know that Chairman Nunes has confirmed that he was on White House grounds Tuesday, and frankly, any questions regarding who he met with or why he was here should be referred to him. I've seen some of the comments that he's made to your outlet in particular about who he met with, and I would refer you to his comments that he's made. I'm not going to get into who he met with or why he met with them. I think that's something that he has been very, very clear, and I'll let him answer. This is he is the one who has discussed what he is reviewing, and so I will leave it up to him and not try to get in the middle of that.
Let's circle on it. I'm asking a slightly different question.
Okay.
At least I'm trying to ask a slightly different question, which is, does the White House know what happened now beyond public accounts? And are you satisfied that you don't have an inappropriate leak in the executive branch?
No, I'm not. We're not concerned about that. I know that he is, again, everything that I know about what he has done is through public reports that he has made on the record to different folks. When he said he has multiple sources, he had met with different folks to gather things as part of his review of the situation. And so all I know and what I'm willing to communicate is what has been made available through on-the-record comments that he has made.
You have to be cleared onto the
No,
White
not
House.
necessarily. I don't know that members of Congress need to be cleared.
But wouldn't the White House want to know?
Again, I think there's a difference. He's doing a review, and it's not something that we're going to necessarily get in the middle of or get in the way of. It's part of it is to let him review and have conversations and look at things that he thinks are relevant.
Sean, a clarification on your answer to Margaret. You just said, I don't know that members of Congress have to get cleared in. There is some question about that. Who in the White House signed him in, essentially, to be able to get
I don't
on
know
the
that you
grounds?
have to. I'll be glad to check on that. I'm not sure that that's how that works, but I will follow up on that point.
And the second question is, and it's related to this, I understand that you're not going to speak about some of the swirl, what's surrounding this issue with Chairman Nunes. Does the White House believe that he can still lead an impartial investigation, or would the administration support some of these calls now for an independent committee to investigate this?
First of all, I would question what this is, because as I've mentioned countless times from this podium, there's two issues at hand. There's multiple. There's number one, there's any action with respect to Russia itself, and every single person that's been briefed by Director Comey in particular and the FBI has said there's nothing there. What he is looking into are two things that we are aware of because of the pleas that we have made. One is the leaks of classified and other information that have come out, and two is whether or not there has been people that have been unmasked and whether or not there's surveillance occurred. I don't know why we stand by the original request that was made, and I think Director Comey in open testimony the other day talked about what the FBI is looking into. So I think we, have a lot of people looking into this whole situation.
Sean, will the administration will the White House pursue a leak investigation into whoever is giving Chairman Nunes this information, if it's in the executive branch?
I at this point, we're letting the review of this situation proceed, and we can address that after he decides to be clear about that.
Why is this leak okay, but other leaks are not?
It's not. I think there's a difference between a leak and someone pursuing a review of a situation that they have determined. That's not. There's a difference between a leak, someone leaking out to reporters for nefarious, to take classified information and share it with people who aren't cleared. Chairman Nunes is cleared. He is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. Someone who is cleared to share classified information with somebody else cleared is not a leak. Zeke.
I have two for you. Just a quick housekeeping note. At the beginning of the briefing, you read out the State Department statement on the protests and arrests in Russia. Does that reflect the White House's views sometimes?
That reflects the view of the United States government.
Okay. Just want to clarify that. And secondly, back on, you mentioned that there were lessons learned off of what went down last week, the last several weeks around healthcare. Could you go into some specifics of what some of those lessons are in terms of, the president talked a lot about, he learned a lot about loyalty, I think is one of the lines he used on Friday. Does he believe that some members of this party are no longer loyal to him? Go through, what are some of the lessons?
No, I'm not going to go through. I mean, obviously this is an internal thing that we discussed, but I will say that, we look at things like everything from, who we met with and when we met with them to, whether or not we should have, how everything was rolled out and what organizations were met with, what commitments were met and when. There's a lot that goes into this, and you look at whether or not that's applicable to another situation, whether that's unique. But obviously, you do look at some of the individuals that you met with, both in terms of timing, in terms of commitment, in terms of substance, and evaluate, just the process itself, but then also to some degree the individuals and whether or not that is someone that there's several folks. And again, it depends on the aspect of it. There's a legislative affairs team, there's a public policy team, there's a comms aspect to this, but we all internally talk about what went well, what didn't, and we do that not just with the bad, but the good. I mean, I think Jonathan asked it somewhat at the beginning, but I think if in most organizations, whether or not you do something really well or not as well, it's usually incumbent upon you to think, what did we do well, so that for things that we did really well, we sustain those kind of aspects of something, because there's always something to improve, and even when you don't do as well, but there's parts of things that you did that could have done, that you did well, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so there's an ongoing piece to this major.
Follow up a little bit on Chairman Nunes, and I have a question about Jared in a second. So, yes, members of Congress may not need to be cleared in, but to get access to a SCIF, I do believe that requires some cooperation from the executive branch, because there are intelligence places on Capitol Hill that are secure that this meeting could have taken place. So it creates the impression that Chairman Nunes came over here and with some degree of cooperation with this White House was able to carry out this meeting and then make the announcement that he did, which is perceived by some, most of them Democrats, I'll grant you that it was trying to be helpful to this president and this administration. So it appears there was some degree of cooperation in this process that the White House granted Chairman Nunes, making it not just an investigative action, but a cooperative one.
Right. So I would refer you to two things. Number one, we've asked both of these entities, both the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees, to undertake this review. So it is partially at our request that they're looking into this. Number two, based on the public comments that he made to Margaret's organization, he has said, from my understanding on the record, that he did not meet with White House staff. So again, I think you're trying to make something that he has himself, from what I've read, not actually been the case.
That's not what I asked you. I asked you about cooperation to have access to a skip,
I understand
which is
that.
something that has to be carried out with your agreement.
I will be glad to take a look at that and figure out whether or not that is an accurate statement or not.
Okay, let me ask you about Jared. There is an understanding that's trying to be worked out, as we understand it, between Jared and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Is that testimony? Is that something that the committee has requested? Is he volunteered?
Yeah.
Does he believe he has something to explain to that committee and more broadly the American public about what he did on behalf of the transition, with whom he met with, and some of the meetings that he took that are raising questions about Russia and folks that he met with that are outside of diplomatic channels but have other aspects to their Russian business deals that may cause concern?
Right. So throughout the campaign and the transition, Jared served as the official primary point of contact with foreign governments and officials until we had State Department officials up. Once we assumed
request.
That's correct. And so given this role, he volunteered to speak with Chairman Burr's committee, but has not received any confirmation regarding a time for a meeting or anything.
Is this going to be a private meeting, or is this going to be a
I don't know. He
what
was
is
at
he trying to accomplish with that?
I think based on the questions that surround this, he volunteered to go in and sit down with them and say, hey, I'm glad to talk about the role that I played and the individuals I met with. But again, remember, given the role that he played both during the campaign and during the transition, he met with countless individuals. That was part of his job. That was part of his role. And he executed it completely as he was supposed to.
And so he doesn't believe he owes the American public an explanation
For
about
what?
this?
Doing his job?
I'm just
Meeting
asking.
with, but you're acting as though there's something nefarious about doing what he was actually tasked to
It's
do.
not every day that someone in a senior position like Jared's volunteers to go talk to the Senate Intelligence Committee about an investigation
because of the-
dealing with meddling by a foreign power.
Right,
in the
and I think
American
based on
election.
the media frenzy around this, and I'm answering it. And I'm just saying to you that based on the media frenzy that existed around this, he volunteered to make sure that he said, hey, we've made some contacts. I'd be glad to explain them. Let me know if you'd like to talk. Plain and simple. Yeah.
So just to be clear, just to kind of follow up on what everyone's been asking about Chairman Nunes. So the White House does the White House have knowledge of the information that Chairman Nunes received when he came to the White House the first time? And if that's the case, or if that's not the case, is your position that the White House is not going to look into where he got the information from, or who gave him the information until his investigation is complete?
I think that I'm not aware of where he got it from. I know in his public statements he's talked about having multiple sources, and so I don't know how he derived a conclusion that he did. And I think that at this point the goal would be to wait until the review that he is undertaking is completed. Caitlin.
Why would Nunes need to brief the president on documents he viewed on White House grounds?
Because that's a big assumption that you're making that's the only thing. He, as I said just a second ago, he had multiple sources on multiple topics. We don't know what he briefed him on in its totality, and so to jump to that conclusion is frankly irresponsible.
One more question.
Yeah.
When will the White House resume releasing visitor logs?
We're reviewing that now. Alexis.
Just to follow up, I have two questions. One is on taxes, but last week you were advising the press corps that it didn't make sense for Nunes to come to the White House and brief the president on something that he had obtained from the White House, from the administration. So my question to you is, I know what you just said, but can you say factually, absolutely flatly, that it is not possible that Chairman Nunes came to brief the president on something that he obtained from the White House or the administration?
I can't say 100% that I know anything what he briefed him on. What I can tell you through his public comments is that he has said that he had multiple sources that he came to a conclusion on. So to the degree to which any of those sources weighed on the ultimate outcome of what he came to a decision on, I don't know, and that's something that frankly I don't even know that he discussed with the president.
So it's possible, as far as you know right now. It's
Anything,
possible.
I mean, that's
It's possible.
anything's possible.
Okay, here's my question on taxes.
Yeah.
The president has said that in the past that he thought maybe tax reform would flow over into 2018, calendar year 2018. And we know from the president's admiration of the 1986 tax reform, that took more than 2 years. Can you answer two questions about tax reform? Does the president anticipate that it will take that long going into 2018 or beyond? And who is going to write the tax legislation? Who is going to devise the plan that the president wants to put his name on?
Well, so on the first one, I know that Secretary Mnuchin has talked about August as a target date, and I think it depends. I mean, as you point out, these are big things. There's a lot of groups that are going to want a ton of input because of the very nature that it's been 30 years. But I think part of this is going to be dependent on whether, how the degree to which we can come to consensus on a lot of big issues. But I know that we have a goal, and it'll depend on a lot of these issues, both on the corporate side and on the individual side, how that process evolves. So to predict it, I know the secretary would like to have it done. He'll play a huge role in this. Gary Cohn will play a big role in it. I think our legislative affairs team would play a role in it. There's a lot of folks on the team, Secretary Ross on the commerce side. There's a lot of individuals that he's assembled a world-class cabinet that has a lot of interest in helping to grow the economy, to attract jobs, create a more favorable tax climate here in the country, but then also provide tax relief for middle-class Americans. So, we're not there yet.
Will it be the Trump plan?
What?
Will it be the president's plan?
I mean, obviously, we're driving the train on this, so I don't want. We're going to work with Congress on this, but I think that the president, as you've heard through multiple times, the president would be very clear. This is a huge priority for him, something that he feels very passionately about, and so we'll have more on that later. John.
Sean, the documents that Chairman Nunes saw here at the White House complex were described by his office as being executive branch documents. In the early days after the president sent out that tweet, the White House was digging around for anything to corroborate what the president had tweeted out. Why did it take the Intelligence Committee chairman coming here to the White House to view executive branch documents to uncover this information? Why couldn't the White House?
Well, as I mentioned, I think to Margaret, I'm not going to. I will stick to what the chairman has said publicly, and my understanding from his public comments are that there are certain systems that he doesn't have access to. That was his explanation, and I'm going to, I think you should follow up with him on that.
Did the White House ever search the same documents that the chairman searched?
I don't know what he found, so therefore it would be hard to make an assessment of what he was briefed on and what we know. So that's a really hard question to answer at this point.
Is it possible that these documents were merely surveillance reports that were
I'm not
garnered?
going to get into hypotheticals, John. I don't know what he found, and to start to say what's possible, what's not, I don't know.
Well, let me just finish if I could. Is it possible that these were surveillance reports from security clearances that were collected after people had filled out standard Form 86?
I don't know. I don't know I honestly don't know what he's got on his systems and what the intel community has on theirs that he wouldn't have access to. So I don't know what he would have had access to already. So, Eamon.
Thanks, John. On tax cuts, it looks like you guys got a little bit of political cover from the House Freedom Caucus over the weekend to do this without paying for all of it. That is adding to the deficit. What's the right number from the White House's perspective to add to the deficit in order to do tax cuts? How high are you willing to go in terms of deficit addition?
It's a really early question to be asking at this point. I think the question is, as we construct this both on the corporate side and then on the individual side, I think part of it is it's going to be an equation that isn't just driven by that, but more what's going to attract jobs, what's going to help us build, what's going to grow the economy. I think we're growing around, potentially growing around 2.6, and the president really would like to see that growth rate up in the high 3s, 4s, and 5s. And so there's a question about what part of tax reform, especially on the corporate side, will help us spur the economy and grow jobs. And I think that's an ongoing discussion. I think that's more of the driver of this, and then I think as it evolves, we'll have a score and we'll know more.
Are you comfortable comfortable entirely adding to the deficit, or do you think some
I
piece of
think,
it needs to be
but
offset? Maybe
right.
some other spending
I
somewhere
don't.
else?
You're asking really early in the process to make that kind of analysis before we have a policy set forth or have any kind of notion of what a score would look like. That Olivier.
Thanks, John. There's been a steady escalation of the American role in the war against the Islamic State. You've seen Marines come ashore in Syria. There were changes to rules of engagement. I'm trying to understand the relationship between that change and the president's ISIS strategy review. Has he personally signed off on all the changes in America's posture in the field since January 20th? Is that something that's left up to the commanders in the field? I don't understand the relationship
Well,
between
it depends
the two
on
things.
which, mission you're talking about specifically, or
Marines
just
left in, I think, October. They obviously went ashore much more recently than that. So did he have to sign off on that?
I think it depends on. I mean, he speaks with General Mattis, his national security team, very regularly. I'm not going to get into some of the details of what comes up in those settings, but I will say that, as I've noted in the past, I think philosophically the president has made it very clear that that he wants to give the commanders on the ground much more flexibility to execute their mission, especially when it comes to defeating ISIS. That's a very big change in philosophy, but I think it also depends on the magnitude of the mission, the number of ground troops in particular, and so this is an ongoing discussion that he has with Secretary Mattis, Chairman Dunford, and others.
On the review, are you waiting? Is the president waiting until the review is complete before you announce sort of a new posture, new strategy?
Yeah,
or is it as conclusions come in, you're adapting day to day?
I think some of it is an ongoing discussion that he's having with both Chairman Dunford of the Joint Chiefs and Secretary Mattis of the DoD, that at certain times when they meet, they'll update him on certain things and give him an update on where they're headed right now. As the review is ongoing, there are certain events that are part of, or will be part and parcel of the review in terms of where we're going, and so they'll update him on that and talk to him about the tweaks. Gabby.
Thank you, Sean. President Trump has sent out 2 tweets now criticizing members of the House Freedom Caucus for preventing Planned Parenthood from being defunded by opposing the HCA. Is that something that he would want to see tacked on as a rider to next month's funding bill?
Well, I think that he's made very clear what his position is on Planned Parenthood, and obviously this was an opportunity to defund it, but I don't want to get ahead of our legislative strategy. We'll look at other opportunities, but this is definitely one that was a way to make that happen. Steve.
On that legislative strategy and the idea of working with Democrats, there's a school of thought in this town that last week proved that the president is lacking in political capital. So I have 2 questions. One is, what's in it for Democrats to work with the president now? And 2, if fully pursued and to get things through the House, Democrats and Republicans work together, wouldn't that tend to undermine the job security of Speaker Ryan if the House Freedom Caucus is frozen out?
Well, so 2 things. Number one, I think the message that sends the American, as I mentioned, I think it was Jonathan at the beginning, it's a 2-way street. We heard, you see whether it's Judge Gorsuch, which they're, throwing down decades of Senate tradition by saying we're just going to filibuster this guy. I don't think there's anyone in America that can honestly look at his qualifications and suggest that he's not qualified as a jurist on the Supreme Court. There's nothing that anyone has seen or laid a glove on him through these 4 days that suggests that he's not qualified to serve. And I think that and again with Obamacare, repealing and replacing it, several of this leading Democrats came out from the get-go and said we have no interest in doing that. So I think there's a point at which both parties can look back and figure out whether or not it's worth engaging. I think the president, as I mentioned, is eager to get to 218 on a lot of his initiatives, whether it's tax reform, infrastructure. There's a lot of things, and I think that he is going to be willing to listen to other voices on the other side to figure out if people want to work with him to get these big things done, to make Washington work, to enhance the lives of the American people, then he's going to work with them. I think he had a great meeting with the CBC the other day, for example, where he talked about infrastructure. He talked about loans and small business lending, education. There are things that he is willing to engage individuals with, or groups or caucuses, to get to 218 and further advance his agenda. So it's not about undermining anybody. It's about moving the agenda forward and getting things done.
It's Speaker Ryan who puts bills on the floor, not the president. So what's in it for Speaker Ryan?
Getting things done. I think there is still a sense of doing what's in the best interest of this country that exists. So, I mean, let's just make sure that we understand. I think that his goal, he came here to get things done. And I think, you know, as it was pointed out, there was a level of disappointment that he expressed on Friday. He wants to get things done. If people want to work together, and I think what this event on Friday did was, frankly, draw more people into the process to saying, okay, let's figure out if we can actually come together with some consensus ideas to get to 218, whether or not they come from one side of the aisle or the other, to pass this bill and to make a better system. He understands, and frankly, I think a lot of Democrats do, that there's an opportunity here. With healthcare being such a big issue, with Obamacare being such a, you know, looming disaster, that we have an opportunity to do some stuff. And if Democrats want to join in, then that's great, and we'll do that. Mike.
Excuse me. You've talked quite a bit up there about the wide latitude that Secretary Price has to dismantle Obamacare from his spot. Is that still the case? Will he continue to try to dismantle Obamacare while you're trying to work with moderate Democrats on healthcare reform? And also, the healthcare bill would have repealed almost all those Obamacare taxes. Do you want to see those repealed as part of the tax reform bill?
I think Secretary Price was up here today. There's a lot of meetings that are already taking place internally with the team. There's a lot of options that are on the table in terms of, especially when it comes to what we called phase 1 and phase 2, trying to get some of that stuff out the door. And as we look back on, you know, we're talking about lessons learned, I think one of them is to try to get some of the phase 1, phase 2 meshed together and pushed out. How we do that, whether we wait for the revival of legislation before we put it up. Remember, I mean, I think, just so we're clear, and I mentioned earlier in this, I mean, Obamacare had a ton of fits and starts during its process. It was left for dead multiple times, but they pressed forward. I don't think that that's necessarily a model to look forward in terms of how they jammed it down. But I do think that we have to recognize that we were, you know, 17, 18 days into this process. I think the president's made very clear it's not over. There are people coming to the table, but he's going to listen to all good ideas across the spectrum to figure out what it takes to get to 218. And we'll see where we go from there. John.
Well, the tax question, just to follow up on the healthcare bill would have repealed those Obamacare taxes.
And I think that's part and parcel of that discussion, is how we look at both the taxes and some of the phase 1 stuff. But we're not ready to announce anything now. John Decker.
Yeah, as far as Jared Kushner's offer to meet with Chairman Burr and talk with the Senate Intelligence Committee, is there any particular reason why the White House would not be opposed to the idea of Jared Kushner testifying under oath before that committee?
Again, Jared volunteered to meet with the committee. They haven't even confirmed having a meeting yet, so to get ahead of what they've even asked for would be a little silly.
Send, in the White House's view, a dangerous precedent in having a senior aide to the president going up. Ordinarily, we see sometimes the White House invoking executive privilege. Why haven't you done this in this particular case?
Because I think Jared did a job during the transition in the campaign where he was a conduit and to leaders, and that's until we had a State Department of functioning place for people to go. Remember, we had a delay in some of these things, and that was his role. And he wants to make sure that he's very clear about the role that he played, who he talked to, and that's it. Jim.
Is Obamacare repealed dead?
I don't think it's dead. In the sense,
have to be dead if you're going to have Democrats working with you.
Why? No, I don't know that that's true, because I think it's,
why would they work with you?
Because it's dying.
You're still trying to repeal it.
Because I think part of it is there's a recognition that it is failing. It's dying on its own. It will be dead soon.
Democrats say it's not dying.
Okay, well then a lot of Democrats need to get more money.
There are repairs that need to be made, they say, but to kill the whole thing might not be
what they want,
the route they want to go.
I think there's a difference. I think that we recognize that premiums continue to go sky high, deductibles are going sky high, choices are going down. By Leader Pelosi's own metric, this is dying. She's the one who crafted the metric. She said that there was a 3-pronged system determining its success. It is an abysmal failure. If they want to come back to the table and recognize how we can do it in a more responsible way to achieve the goals that Obamacare set out to do, but do so in a way that's going to do the opposite of what Obamacare actually did, which is to increase choice, drive down cost, we're willing to have that discussion. But right now, and I again,
They say
remember,
repeal has to be
right,
put to
but
the side.
but Jim, one of the things that I mentioned, I just want to be clear on this, is we have to figure out how we get to 216, 218, depending on where the number is that given day. That doesn't mean we need the entire Democratic caucus. That means we need some responsible Democrats who want to sit down and have a discussion about how to do that. And I think that there may be enough of them that are willing to do that. But I understand where the Democratic leadership is, and that's one thing. I mean, they continue to stake out a very, very far left position. That's not where all their members are. And I think that we can, based on the calls that have come in over the last 50, 60 hours, I think that there might be some room to have a conversation with people who want to engage in a constructive conversation on how to move forward. And so let's see how that evolves. I don't know that we're ready to jump into this today, but I think as the calls come forward, the president's view is if you all want to get together and start coming to a way that we can come to resolution, we're willing to listen. But right now, we've got an agenda to continue to pursue.
Middle ground there, you think?
I'm not going to jump ahead, but I will say that we believe that there is something that could still be done at some point. And I think the further along we go, where premiums continue to go up, more and more people will be drawn into this discussion because there's going to be a continued cry from people in terms of the impact that it's having on their pocketbook and on their ability to see people that a doctor of their choice or a plan that's just not seating them anymore. April.
Real quick follow-up on Chairman Nunes. Do you reject that there's any kind of perception problem whatsoever in having the chairman over here the day before he comes out publicly and says, by the way, there's this information that's helpful to the president?
I think the chairman's made very clear through his public comments what his goal was, and I think anyone who wants to, you can't ask someone to do a review of the situation and then sort of create inferences that because they're reviewing a situation that there's something that's not right about that. He is reviewing the situation. He did exactly what, and I think he's been fairly open with the press as far as what he was doing, who he spoke to, and why. And I think from our standpoint, that's what we had asked to do as a review. April.
Sean, several topics. One,
shocker.
Don't be. You heard the question that I lobbed at the Attorney General about the hate crime that happened in New York. The white supremacist who went to New York and targeted a black man. Hate crimes are on the rise. What do you say? What is this White House saying about this obvious, apparent hate crime?
I'm not gonna. I mean, you yelled at the Attorney General a specific case, if I'm not correct.
In the past to talk about this, and you've talked about issues of
Right,
hate crimes.
and I'm glad to talk about the issue. I just want to be very clear that I am not going to reference any specific case before the DOJ right now. I will say that the president has recognized that we need to bring the country together. He wants to unite this country. He wants to bring people together. He had a very long conversation with respect to race in itself, which I think is somewhat, if I'm not correct in your question. There, okay, I just want to be clear. Thank you. And I think that was one of the topics that he talked about with the CBC. Some of the issues with respect to crime and education and some of the solutions that they suggested that could be done during their meeting. And I think those are the kind of things that I think we can continue that conversation.
Okay, Sean, unfortunately, there's been a rise in hate crimes when it comes to different groups, to include anti-Semitic crimes.
Yeah, and
but you've commented from that podium. This is clear. This gentleman in his jailhouse gave a statement to a reporter talking about he wishes the man were younger and he was a thug that he killed. So what do you say to this? This is clear. It's racism at its utmost.
Yeah. Two issues. Number one, I think hate crimes, anti-Semitic crimes of any nature should be called out in the most reprehensible way. There is no room for that in our country, and I think the president noted that in the joint address, that there is one issue that, despite policy, should unite us, and that is calling out hate, that is calling out divisiveness based on the color of one's skin, one's religion, one's gender. The president's been very clear on that, and he's called it out before. He's, with respect to certain particular situations, he made it very clear at the opening of his joint address. That's what he led with, is a call to denounce hate no matter where we come from politically. He's also talked about it the night that he took the stage on that Wednesday morning around 2:40 a.m. about how one of the things that he needed to do and wanted to do as president was unite all Americans. But I think that there's one other piece to this, April, that I just want to be clear on. While we unequivocally, no question about it, need to call out hate, anti-Semitism where it exists, There is another thing that we have to do, and in your case in particular, while I don't know all of the details and I don't want to reference any specific case, but I think we saw this the other day with some of the anti-Semitic behavior that was going out with respect to people of the Jewish faith, is that we saw these threats coming into Jewish community centers, and there was an immediate jump to criticize folks on the right and to denounce people on the right and ask them to condemn them. And it turns out that, in fact, it wasn't someone on the right. And it was the president from the get-go had said, I bet you it's not someone, and he was right. And yet, oh no, I understand that. And that's
I'm saying he's a white supremacist.
I understand that, and I think in those cases, there's no question, black and white, we need to call out all instances of this. But that being said, while we're on the topic, I do think that there has been a rush to judgment in a lot of other cases when it comes to, in particular, some of the anti-Semitic discussion, where people have jumped to the conclusion about denouncing people on the right and asking for this. And in that particular case, we saw that the president was right and that this rush to judgment by a lot of folks on the left was wrong, and none of them have been held to account on that. And that is something that equally needs to be called out. When people are charging something of someone that is not true, there has been nothing to go back to those individuals. Nothing on the left who came and asked for everyone on the right to denounce something that they weren't guilty of. And I think that there needs to be an equal go back in time and call out those individuals for rushing to judgment and calling out those individuals.
My second topic, and I'm done. Someone who was in the room, you like talking about this CBC meeting that happened last week, someone who was actually in the room at that meeting said that the issue of HBCUs came up, and that's a very sensitive subject right now in the black community and here at the White House. The issue of HBCUs came up, and it's Omarosa said that she would be the one heading the HBCU office at the White House, and the president did not make a response confirming or denying. Will this be the case? Is this the case?
We don't have any announcements to make. I assume that you're referring to the executive order, and we don't have anything to announce on that subject at this time. Kristen.
Sean, thank you. Given that the Freedom Caucus blocked the bill to repeal the Obamacare, does the president still believe he can work with the Freedom Caucus on future pieces of legislation?
I think it's going to depend on what legislation.
So not necessarily.
Well, I'm not going to. It's not a question of we're going to work with anybody who wants to work with us on achieving the goals that the president set out. I don't think we're not putting anyone and saying we'll never work with you again. It is that balance. No, I don't think he's written. No, I think as he mentioned, he learned a lot through this process about loyalty. And it's not just a block, it's certain individuals. And again, I'm not going to get into naming names, but I think the president learned a lot through this process. And you know, one of the things that's interesting is when you look back, and I know there's been a lot to make of this, the president also recognizes that when there's not a deal to be made, when to walk away. That's one of the traits. It's not just about making deals, it's knowing when to walk away from deals and knowing when there's a bad deal that's the only solution. I think the president understood that while you can get a deal at the time, that sometimes a bad deal is worse than getting a deal. And I think he smartly recognized that what was on the table was not going to be keeping with the vision that he had. And so he decided that this was not the time and that a deal was not at hand.
Let me ask you about this tweet over the weekend. Does he regret tweeting to his followers that they should tune in to Judge Jeanine only to tune in and then have her call for House Speaker
He's a
Paul
fan
Ryan
of the
to
show.
step down?
That's it, plain and simple.
But does he owe Speaker Ryan an apology then?
He and Speaker Ryan talked extensively over the weekend. I mean, I don't know if they talked today. I think they talked both Saturday and Sunday at length. But again, he's a fan of the show. He tweeted out support of it. That's it, plain and simple. I know what a lot of people say, Kristen. I just said it.
So does he owe the House Speaker an apology?
He doesn't. He's spoken for what? For supporting a show on Fox? No.
And does
Dave.
he still have confidence they can work together,
Dave.
Sean?
Dave.
Two questions. One, on the president choosing Jared Kushner for this new Office of American Innovation to reform government across the government. Obviously, Jared Kushner has 60-some days of experience in Washington, never had a prior government job. Does the president view that somehow as an advantage in this case?
In some cases, when you look at the individuals that he's bringing in, again, I think one of the things that Jared, and again, they may talk more about this later, but one of the things that Jared's looking at is some of the procurement, the technology aspects. And if you've ever really dealt with the government and recognized how outdated and unmodernized some of this is, it is not serving the American people. It is not serving the constituents that many departments have. And I think looking at how we procure different things and procure technology in particular is important. It's an important way. I mean, I think when you look at the VA in particular and recognize how it handles certain things, there are certain things it does really well. By the way, it buys prescription drugs really well, buys them in bulk, gets the job done. But there's certain things that it may not do as well in terms of how it keeps its records and how it serves veterans, how it lends money, et cetera, that we can look at and figure out, is there a better way? Government is not business, right? We recognize that there are certain things that business would never do in terms of what government has to do because we serve all of our people. But there are certain practices that we can put in place that can help us deliver a better product, a better service to the American people in some of these key areas. And I think that when you look at some of the business acumen that Jared and some of the other individuals who he is bringing into this process can really, I think it is a great service to this country. There are so many individuals that Jared has talked to that have done so well and been so blessed by our nation, that have wanted to give back in some way, shape, or form, and are using this opportunity to help our country and serve our country in ways that they believe they can use their expertise to do.
And on healthcare, this review that you've talked about, what went right, what went wrong. I know you don't want to name names, but would it be fair to say at this point that the president has written off some people?
I think I answered that question. It's not a question of written them off. It's a question of understanding. There's sort of an understanding of how you deal with certain people and how they dealt with you, but it's not a question of writing them off. We're going to need to get to, as time goes on, I'm going to just keep saying 218. It's easier. I won't screw that one up down the line. But I think that we recognize that as we go down this path of a big, bold agenda that the president has, that we're going to need every vote we can and hopefully grow the vote in some cases to well beyond that. But we're not writing off anybody, but we do recognize there's some lessons learned from this process, and the president made it very clear on Friday. Thank you guys very much. I'll see you tomorrow. Enjoy the day.
You think we'll see it before midterm?
Welcome. We are back with the post show after the Sean Spicer White House press briefing. Covered a number of topics in the press briefing. Would love to get your reaction to the press briefing, different things Sean Spicer talked about. If you'd like to write in, you can either go to Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Lookner, at Lookner, and you can direct message me there. Or you can email me at steve.lookner@rsbn.tv. Probably I don't want to say highlight. Highlight sounds weird, but probably I would say the thing that most stuck out to me in the press briefing was the start of the press briefing when Sean Spicer brought in Attorney General Jeff Sessions to make a statement. And Jeff Sessions made a strong statement against sanctuary cities. He said he complained about sanctuary cities and said that they were allowing people to stay in the country and commit crimes who would not normally be here. And sanctuary cities are those cities that don't cooperate with federal law enforcement who are trying to get illegal immigrants out of the country. For example, a sanctuary city, local law enforcement could arrest somebody for some crime, and either local law enforcement, let's say local law enforcement finds out they're an illegal immigrant. The federal government might ask local law enforcement to hold the person for a couple extra days so they can come get them and deport them. But in some cities, they won't do that, and they'll just let the person go. So sanctuary cities are cities basically where they don't cooperate with the federal government in terms of trying to don't cooperate with federal government who is trying to find illegal immigrants and deport them, and rather they let it be known that they are places that are places where illegal immigrants can feel more safe about staying in, because these cities make an effort to not to protect these people in some sense from being found out and deported by the federal government. So Jeff Sessions came out with a strong statement against sanctuary cities, he said something which was reiterated something which was also in an executive order President Trump signed earlier in his term, but that the federal government was going to withhold money from cities that act as sanctuary cities and don't cooperate with the federal government in terms of letting them know about illegal immigrants and holding illegal immigrants and those kind of things. And he said he was asked some questions about this, and basically there's questions about what particular money the federal government is allowed to withhold. Can it just be money from the Department of Justice for, say, policing, or can there be other money in there? It's that these are all more complex issues. But the basic idea of what Jeff Sessions was saying was a criticism of sanctuary cities and saying the federal government was going to do what it can do to withhold money from sanctuary cities until they start cooperating more with the federal government. So that was a quite interesting part of this press briefing. And there were other parts too, but again, I would love to get your feedback on the press briefing and just the issues going on, with from the health bill to possible tax reform legislation coming up to Jared Kushner says he's going to testify in front of the House. I think is it the House or the Senate? Now I can't remember which one it was. Let's see if I have it down here. He said he's going to testify, and the Senate Intelligence Committee is going to interview Jared Kushner in their whole investigation to Russia involvement in our election last year. So there's questions about that. So lots of different stuff covered. Would like to get your feedback and your comments on this stuff. I think some people might have already sent in messages, so let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. This is from Grammatink. And Grammatink says, "Did you see Schumer offer to help? It's a ruse. He is scared, actually. If we leave OC alone, Obamacare alone, no denial of the truth will be possible. He wants to compromise quick to save his backside if Trump does nothing." So your view, and I didn't see what you were referring to, Grammatink, but it sounds like your view is that Schumer actually will want to work with President Trump to fix Obamacare in some way because Schumer thinks, in your view, Obamacare is going to fail, and he doesn't want to be responsible for that, so he wants to actually work with President Trump on this. We'll see what happens, but thank you for the comment, Grammatink. Let's see here. If there were I think somebody sent in an email as well. Here we go. I think this is about Schumer too. I missed this. I was watching the press briefing. I missed this. This is Nola Smith from Morgan Hill, California. She writes, "So I got a kick out of seeing headline on Fox News this morning that Schumer is willing to work with President to get a health care bill passed. You know why? He is scared. Obamacare needs to fail miserably in the next 6 months or year so that more folks see more lies revealed. Yes, Republicans will be upset waiting, but I promise you this intimidation by Schumer trying to force compromise is really fear of what happens to him and the left if nothing happens. President Trump remains shrewd," from Nola Smith. So interestingly, Nola Smith and who is it? It's Grammatink. They both have a similar comment that they think that Schumer is only offering to help because he's worried that Obamacare is going to fail, and he thinks he doesn't want to get blamed for it and doesn't want the Democrats to get blamed for it. So thank you for your comments. If you'd like to write in further comments, the information's on your screen, at Lookner on Twitter, at LOOKNER, or steve.lookner@rsbn.tv. I want to mention some of the other things that came up in the press briefing. So what else did I have down here? So speaking of healthcare, Sean Spicer did say, "I don't think we've seen the end of healthcare." So he suggested that in the future, there could be another health care bill proposed. So we can wait and see what happens with that. And also, Sean Spicer said, we've learned a lot through this process, talking about the whole process of the health care bill that ended up getting pulled. And then Sean Spicer, interestingly, said that they were working on tax reform next. And one thing he said is, we're driving the train on this, talking about the White House. So that suggests that maybe there's a contrast being drawn with the tax reform proposal that is to come and the health care bill. Because in the health care bill, it was Sean Spicer seems to be saying. Well, the implication here is that Congress was really driving that, whereas Sean Spicer seems to be saying that the White House will be driving any kind of tax reform bill. Now, technically speaking, the House has to come up with this bill themselves. They have to propose the bill, not the president. But we can imagine the president working with Congress on this because the president ultimately has to sign the bill. So, and one other comment here that the press secretary said, Sean Spicer said, he doesn't reject the notion of passing deficit-increasing tax reform. And he suggested that the president is willing to increase deficits to promote growth. So, Republicans, a lot of Republicans want to be fiscally responsible and don't want to increase the deficit. So, but there's this proposal out there that President Trump has talked about wanting to lower the corporate tax rate. So you might wonder, hey, if President Trump's going to be a good Republican, can he really just lower the corporate tax rate, because that might increase the deficit? And something Sean Spicer is saying is the president is willing to increase deficits to promote growth. So the idea would be, so say we're talking about a corporate tax rate. The idea would be that if President Trump passed a corporate tax rate, sure, it might increase the deficit in the short run, but if it makes the economy better, then more tax revenues overall come in, and it ends up promoting growth and ends up not increasing the deficit, rather shrinking the deficit in the long term because the economy is doing better. Another thing Sean Spicer was asked about was the tweet President Trump sent out on Friday, I believe it was. I think it was Friday, not Saturday, when he said, watch Fox News at 9 p.m. And that was the time when the Judge Jeanine show with Jeanine Pirro was coming on. And then the first thing she said on the show for like the first 5 minutes was Speaker Ryan should resign or get fired or whatever. Or they, I don't know if they call it getting fired if the House chooses another speaker. But anyways, she said that Speaker Ryan should no longer be speaker. And there was some speculation on whether President Trump tweeted out, watch this show, knowing in advance what Judge Jeanine was going to talk about, and it was kind of like a shot at Paul Ryan. But according to Sean Spicer, the tweet that the President Trump sent out was the reason for that was he's a fan of the show. So Sean Spicer said that's why he tweeted that. It's because he's a fan of the show, not because he wanted people to see someone saying that Paul Ryan shouldn't be speaker anymore. I'm going to check here, make sure I'm caught up on any kind of comments and stuff. I have a comment here. Let's see. This is from Corey. Corey, I think, sent me a YouTube link, which I might not be able to watch. But Corey sent me a link which says, Bull Burton interview from March 2009, Assistant Department Press Secretary from Obama administration. Interesting perspective. I've been researching old press briefings, and it's interesting how things have progressed in the spirit of Spicer's briefing room today. It picks up around 1248, where it talks about Obama's off-the-record lunches with media to impact the news and their opinions. So Corey, you say you've been looking at old briefings, which I think is a really interesting idea, and seeing how they differ from the Sean Spicer briefings. I'd be interested in knowing more about what you think the differences are. Have you noticed big differences between the President Obama briefings, say with Josh Earnest, and the Sean Spicer briefings? Would be interested in knowing if you want to write back. Speaking of Josh Earnest, I got Micah, the producer here, told me right before we were coming on for the post show that he had heard that Josh Earnest was being hired. Micah, was it by CNN or MSNBC? Who hired him as a news NBC and MSNBC hired Josh Earnest as a political expert to be on air. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. With mainstream media, their political coverage, so many of the people on both sides of the spectrum are these people who worked for a particular administration or run a super PAC that favors one side or the other. And to me, it's not interesting watching these people because you pretty much know what they're going to say before they talk about an issue. If they're the Democratic people, I know what Paul Begala is going to say on any particular issue, pretty much. It's not a big surprise. And at a certain point, I feel like they're not even using critical thinking and coming up with their own take. They're just when they hear about an issue and they're asked a question, they're just going to support their cause. So I don't find that educational at all to watch these people are interesting, and that's why I avoid lots of mainstream media panels. I'll watch them once in a while, but I get angry really fast because I'm just like, they're just giving talking points for their side. And this happens on both sides too. If they have a Republican on who's just going to parrot Republican talking points, why do I want to watch that person? I already know what they're going to say. So it's another thing. I'll say this also, which is also bothersome. When people who work in administrations get hired for these high-paying, on-air political expert jobs after they're in service, doesn't that seem a little bit cozy between the media and the people they're supposed to be covering? It just feels icky to me, Keep them separate. That's my little 2 cents for right now. Okay, so I want to get back to the briefing. If you have any comments on the briefing or any of the other events that are going on, write in. We'll stay on for a few more minutes here. The information's down there at Lookner on Twitter or steve.lookner at rsbn.tv. What do you think about going to tax reform next? The president wasn't able to get anything through on with health care. Will the president be able to get anything through with tax reform, or is it going to be too difficult? Might, say, infrastructure be an easier thing to get through, because with infrastructure, it's like everybody seems to want to pass an infrastructure bill. Except maybe you might have certain conservative Republicans who are like, we don't want to spend the money. But I think you might get Democrats on board for that. Now, as I said before, I don't think the Democrats are going to be on board with much, but if it involves like spending money to hire people for stuff, I'm guessing Democrats might get on board with that. So it's that would be, like, it seems, maybe the easiest thing to get passed first, but it doesn't sound like the president's going to go for that. It sounds like he's going to tax reform. We'll see what ends up happening. Some other things that were talked about that I wrote down during the briefing were, what did I have here? Oh, so Sean Spicer was asked about Jared Kushner's meetings with Russian officials. This is the meetings, his contacts with Russians are going to be what he's going to be asked about, presumably, when he gets interviewed by the Senate Intelligence Committee. And what Sean Spicer said is, you're acting as if there was something nefarious in doing what he was tasked to do. So the idea would be, Jared Kushner was going to be a leading figure in this administration, so there's nothing wrong with him meeting with Russian officials. This is part of what he should be doing as someone who's going to be a lead official in the administration. So that was Sean Spicer's reaction to that. There were a number of questions on this whole story that's coming out about Devin Nunes. So if you haven't heard this, remember, Devin Nunes is the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and he reported last week that he had gotten some information from a source that suggested that that there were intelligence reports out there about surveillance conducted by the federal government, and in those intelligence reports there were details about President Trump and or his associates. It wasn't clear whether this surveillance involved President Trump and or his associates, or it was surveillance of foreign people who were talking about President Trump and or his associates. But what Devin Nunes was mad about was he felt that these details about President Trump and or his associates were spread around in these intelligence reports, which were widely distributed, including being distributed to the White House reportedly. And then these details, these details were not kept secret. So Devin Nunes had a problem with details about President Trump and or his associates being widely disseminated in intelligence reports, and thought either the names had become unmasked, who these details were about, or it was just obvious who they were about. And so he was looking into this. But there were these questions about, well, who was the source that Devin Nunes got this information from? And it came out in the last, I don't know if it was this morning or in the last 24 hours, I believe it was this morning, that Devin Nunes, I believe, said this in an interview, that he got, the day he made this announcement last Wednesday, and that he got this information from the source on Tuesday evening, and he got this information on Tuesday evening from the source in a building on the White House grounds, a building next to the White House. And I get from what Devin Nunes said is, well, there's only certain places you can go and actually that they have access to this information that he was shown. And only certain buildings you can go to where this information is allowed to be accessed. And he was shown the information by someone. He wasn't allowed to keep the information. And that was his explanation. But we've seen people tweeting today things like, oh, he got the information from the White House, then he went back there the next day to tell them the information he got from them. That's not what happened. He didn't go into the White House and get information there and then come back the next day and tell President Trump the information he got from him the day before. It was a building on the White House grounds. So there were a number of questions on that. That seems like an issue which is kind of murky right now. Maybe there'll be more that comes out on it today. We'll see what happens. Let's see, anything else that was covered that was interesting? Joanne has a question, Joanne Goldsnyder. She says, Steve, I would love for once to have a reporter at the briefing ask a positive question or say something nice about President Trump. Yeah, that doesn't really happen much at the briefings. I did notice one thing I thought was kind of odd. And there's an African-American female reporter, I don't know her name, and she asked a couple questions of Sean Spicer. I should know her name, and I got to look it up. But there was this odd thing where when Attorney General Sessions was speaking, right as he was leaving, she like shouted a couple questions at him, and they seemed like really like hostile, like her tone of voice. Like she talked about like Eric Garner or something else, and it was like, I don't care what questions they ask people in these meetings. I mean, ask them whatever you want. You're the press. You're trying to get information. But that stood out. It seemed like when I first heard this question, I was like, is this person asking this just like there for today? Is this person like some person who's not used to being in this kind of room? And maybe they were like, this is the one day they were let in that room and they were working for some partisan publication or something? Because it was just like, it was really shouted angrily at Attorney General Sessions. And like, the anger with which it was shouted to me implied, like there was this implication of like, you're not answering this question and I'm just going to yell it at you to show that you're not answering this question. It was really negative and kind of nasty to me. And then when she asked the questions of Sean Spicer, she was perfectly professional and they were perfectly reasonably asked. So I just thought that was an odd moment. I don't know if there's a history between them or something, but it was very odd to me. So if you want, go back and watch. It's right when Sean Spicer is walking out, and she's so angry about it. And then when she refers to it when she talks to Sean Spicer later, and she's totally calm. And it was kind of odd to me. I need to look up who it is, anyways. So I noticed that. But that was a moment when you say like, ask a positive question, Joanne. Will they ever ask a positive question? That was one where it was like really super negative. But that was, I understand that the reporters, they want to get information. So in general, you're not going to have positive questions or saying positive things at these press briefings because they're trying to get information. And I feel like from my memory of the President Obama ones, they weren't really a lot of positive questions either. But yeah, I know what you're saying, which is, it does feel like there could maybe be more questions that one after the other questions are like always like very like, President Trump or somebody he's in his administration is doing something wrong, we're going to ask about it, So, but I appreciate your comment. Thanks for writing in. Chad Matthew writes in, I think the African-American woman you're referring to is April. This is Chad Matthews. Chad Matthews says, I think the African-American woman you're referring to is April. She's a liberal moron. She has insinuated Trump is racist. So that was what Chad has. Chad, thank you for answering my question so fast. So who is it? April? I'm going to Google April White House press briefing. I'd like you to know exactly what I'm Googling to give you my Google strategy. Let's see. Nothing's coming up. I thought for sure that would tell me. Well, if you know who it is, I'll look it up later, but if you know who it is in the next couple of minutes, you can feel free someone to write in and inform me who it is. And I just want to check my email one more time. We're going to have to wrap it up in a couple of minutes here. There we go. I have a question here. This is from Jeff Burkholder. Jeff Burkholder writes in, Steve, did Reince Priebus get caught as the leak mole for the White House? I just heard that, but not in the mainstream media. What are your thoughts? So I have not heard anything about Reince Priebus being caught as a mole. A further question I would have about your question, Jeff, is what leak are you talking about? So there were like leaks about General Flynn. There's this leak of information that got to Devin Nunes last week. Are you talking about a specific leak or about more leaks in general? But I've heard nothing about Reince Priebus getting caught as a leak mole for the White House. Now, there might be a report out there somewhere, but I have not seen it yet. So, Jeff, that's the best I can do in answering your question. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful for you. And you sent a so Jeff sends Jeff Burkholder sends a second message. He says, "Steve, you're doing a great job, and thank you for what you're doing." You're welcome, Jeff. Thank you for saying that. Question: why is no one up in arms over the 14-year-old girl in Rockville, Maryland, that got raped by the 2 illegal immigrants from her high school? And how in the world are we allowing illegals to attend high school on our tax dollars? This is crazy. So a couple of things here. Well, clearly Jeff Sessions is alarmed by illegal immigrants committing crimes, because the whole first part of that press conference was Jeff Sessions saying we got to crack down on sanctuary cities. I think you're asking, though, why is more of the mainstream media not alarmed by it? You'll have to ask the mainstream media that question. Or are you saying why aren't liberals alarmed? There's a lot of different things you could be saying. But I will say that clearly the White House is aware of the problem and they're working on it. They're specifically targeting illegal immigrants who they think are threats of committing crimes and trying to get them out of the country, and that's what Jeff Sessions was talking about. But appreciate your opinion. So Jeff feels that people should be more up in arms over the 14-year-old girl in Rockville, Maryland. And in terms of allowing illegals to attend high school on our tax dollars, this is an issue I need to look up more, because, for example, there are colleges, 2 public colleges where undocumented students go, and these public colleges are supported by the state or by the federal government or both, and taxpayer money goes for them, and some of the students who go to those schools are undocumented immigrants. And I need to look into this more in terms of how much is being spent on that? Are there laws about it? I know really nothing about that whole thing. And so when is a burden on a high school or a college, a public high school or college, to ask for students' immigration status? If they find out about it, is there a legal burden on them to pull the student or something? I don't know about all these questions. It's a great question. I will look into it more. So thank you, Jeff, for asking about it. Oh, and Chad Matthew says April Ryan is her name. April Ryan is the name of the journalist who was talking today. I'm just looking her up in the press briefing. Yes, you're right. She's an American journalist serving as a White House correspondent and Washington bureau chief for American Urban Radio Networks. Thank you. Generally here, you guys are very helpful when I don't know the name of somebody or something. You write in right away. So much appreciated. Thanks, Chad Matthew. Al Parks write in, Sean Spicer is fighting a wall of narrative at each briefing, yet none of the narrative is getting traction. Thank you, Al. And something else, you reminded me of something else Sean Spicer said today, which I thought was really good. Sean Spicer said this thing that I tweeted about this. I don't think Sean Spicer said it because I tweeted about it, but a couple months ago, or a month or 6 weeks ago, when all of these anti-threats to Jewish community centers were being made, a number of people in the media and in the public were saying this is because they were implying that this was because Donald Trump was racist or anti-immigrant or just intolerant, and they were implying that somehow these threats should be blamed on Donald Trump. And Sean Spicer said, today, he said in the briefing, and of course the threats ended up the vast majority of the threats, as was revealed a few days ago, were made by a Jewish American Israeli person. So Sean Spicer said today, and something I said is, when it came out that this Jewish American Israeli person was actually the source of the threats, is the media going to report that nearly as much as they reported the threats? And when they're reporting the threats, focusing on this is Trump's fault kind of stuff. But of course, the media didn't really report the actual story that much of who was actually making the threats when that came out. And Sean Spicer's made that point today. He said, when these threats were being made, all these people were jumping on the on the right and saying the right should apologize for the threats. And Donald Trump said, we don't even know who's making these threats, and maybe it's not somebody on the right. And what Sean Spicer said is that when it was revealed a couple days ago, these threats were not being made up by somebody affiliated with Donald Trump or somebody on the right. He said nobody calls out those people who were blaming the right for this. Nobody calls them out, and they should be called out. And I agree with him that whenever so a story gets reported and people blame the right or blame Trump for it, and then if the story gets corrected or more information comes out and shows that President Trump, it wasn't his fault or it wasn't the right's fault, that doesn't get reported on. Nobody gets called out for it. So I think bravo, Sean Spicer, for making that point. Thought it was great. Chad Matthew sent me April Ryan's page. Thank you, Chad. I'll check that out. And Sam Miller also says, April Ryan, longtime White House correspondent, always makes false statements about Republicans being racist. Thank you, Sam, for your opinion on April Ryan. Appreciate it. So we've about a minute more to go here. And I just want to say we will be covering the Sean Spicer briefings all of this week, as we always do here at Right Side Broadcasting, with a pre-show and a post-show, and hope you join us for that. And tonight we have a full lineup on Right Side Broadcasting of programming, which we hope you tune into. At 8 p.m. we have Nick Fuentes. I keep forgetting America First with Nick Fuentes. I really want to tell you, I never did this on the air. Let's see if I can find this article. There was a whole big article in the Boston Globe. Yes, it's called "The Kids Are Far Right." This was run in the Boston Globe last week. So if you Google Boston Globe Nick Fuentes, I don't know if this article is behind a paywall, but I think at the Boston Globe you get a few free articles anyway. And it's an article which talks about Nick Fuentes, talks about Cassie Dillon, who does work here for Right Side Broadcasting, and it talks about Right Side Broadcasting a little bit. So you can go check that article out if you want. But America First with Nick Fuentes is on at 8 tonight Eastern. Then at 9 we have the Wayne Dupree Show. And at 10 p.m. we have The Right Mindset with Mike Cernovich. Hope you watch all of those shows. If you enjoy our programming here, our coverage of the news and the press briefings and of our shows and bringing you President Trump rallies, and hopefully there'll be more soon that we can bring to you. Please consider donating to us because we rely on your donations to stay on the air. Without your donations, we cannot be on the air. So we really rely on them. If you'd like to donate, even if you only a couple dollars, even if it's $1, honestly, if everybody who watched donated $1, we would be happy. So if you want to donate, there's a chat room next to the broadcast when it's broadcasting live, and on the bottom of the chat room there's a little $sign. You can click on that $sign, and it makes donating very easy. Also, you can go to rsbn.tv/donate. That's rsbn.tv/donate. Thank you to the moderators for moderating today. Much appreciated. Thanks to Micah, our producer, Micah Messer, who produced today. Really appreciate that. If there's more breaking news, as always, when there's breaking news, we come back on live. Even if it's on the weekend, even if it's at night, we cover it for you, give you an alternative to the mainstream media. So if there's breaking news today, I'll come back on and talk about it. But otherwise, hope you have a great day, rest of your day, and hope you tune in tonight for Right Side's programming. But for now, for our coverage at Right Side of the Sean Spicer press briefing, have a great day for now. I'm Steve Lickner, and we will see you hopefully later tonight or tomorrow or sometime in the near future. Keep watching Right Side. Have a good one.